Hey guys, this is Seth from the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. Just like last week, we're combining the Battle off Samar, two episodes into one, into a very long form video. We hope you guys enjoy this. This is going to be theoretically the last episode for season 3, even though we've already wrapped season 3. This is just a viewer response. A lot of you guys wanted us to do this, so we've done it. Combine these last 2 episodes into one. So enjoy the Battle of Samar, this epic naval clash. We combined both episodes into one, and we look forward to seeing you in season 4. Thanks, guys. Hello and welcome to episode 328 of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. My name is Seth Parrott, historian and deputy director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum here at Camp Shelby. And with me, as always, is my esteemed co-host, retired Navy Captain Bill Tody, former skipper of the fast attack submarine USS Indianapolis, Commodore Submarine Squadron 3 in Pearl Harbor, and many other postings. How are you this fine March 12th, Bill?
So, Seth, I'm so looking forward to this episode, not only because it's my anniversary today, happy 41st anniversary to my wife, but because this is one of the canonical battles of all of World War II. And we're finally getting to talk about it. This battle is the movie Tom Hanks should have made when he made Greyhound. But don't get me started.
Well, happy anniversary, Bill. First,
happy anniversary.
Well,
good on you.
I appreciate it.
Indeed. And obviously, we have our third member of our crew here, Jon Parshall. How are you this fine? It's not your anniversary, is it, Jon? Oh.
No, it's not. That was back in February.
Right.
I'm sure, just as thrilled about daylight savings time as you and a lot of our other viewers are. So yeah,
here we are. Getting into a good sleep pattern too, and boom, gone right out to Jon.
Yeah.
Well, all right, guys, on with the show. Kurita's center force, the most powerful of the 4 forces the Japanese sent to Leyte Gulf, had been hit by American submarines, Bill, and aircraft over a period of 2 days on October 23rd and 24th, 1944. Submarines Darter and Dace had whittled down Kurita's forces by 3 heavy cruisers before center force even entered their battle area. The following day, American aircraft from Halsey's Task Force 38 slashed at Kurita all day long and further whittled down his powerful force, sinking the battleship Musashi in air attacks that saw the great ship die a death of 1,000 cuts. Believing Kurita defeated, thanks in part to the overly inflated claims made by the American naval aviators who had attacked center force all day long, and distracted by the cheese that was the bait dangled in front of his face, that of course being Ozawa's carriers, Halsey turned the powerful Task Force 38 north and went chasing after that carrier battle he had longed for since 1942. In so doing, Halsey made several critical errors. One of those errors would blossom like an unwanted boil on the stern of Admiral Thomas Kincaid when the supposedly defeated center force suddenly appeared on the horizon, literally with guns blazing, shooting at, of all things, American aircraft carriers. Center force would come to grips with the small American task unit 77.4.3, otherwise known to history by its call sign Taffy 3. In the chaotic, confusing, and utterly heroic fight that would follow, the outnumbered and outgunned Taffy 3 would engage in a running fight for their lives with the likes of Yamato and the rest of Kurita's force and enter legend in the Battle off Samar. Guys, this is easily, this is top 2, 3 World War II naval battles, period. This is legendary. So,
from a heroism standpoint, it's hard to measure heroism. We don't have an objective heroism dial, but this one's got to be tied with several for number 1.
Yeah, it's up there.
Like they say in Spinal Tap, this one goes to 11 here.
This one goes to 11.
This one goes to 11. This one goes to 11. So before we go any further, we've been dancing around it for the last several weeks. We have to talk about it. The elephant in the room. And we all know what that elephant in the room is. And his name is Admiral William F. Halsey. So we got to get into it. We got to, because his decisions play a direct role in what happens here, or doesn't, as the case may be. So at 1640 on October 24th, as Mitcher's aviators are absolutely beating Musashi into oblivion, Admiral Halsey receives the message he had been waiting for, as I said in the intro, since 1942. One of his scouts spots a Japanese aircraft carrier task force to Halsey's north, making a course directly for, in the general vicinity of his Task Force 38. So, I said this is the cheese that's being dangled in front of him. And it literally was, because that's exactly what the Japanese wanted it to be.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
Halsey puts his head in that trap and snap, he goes. So let's talk about this. Let's dissect this whole decision and process that goes on here. It's confusing to an extent, and I know, John, you put in the notes that it's his staff that probably
Yeah,
has a lot of the blame here.
yeah, I do. Yeah. It's a distributed decision. I mean, it's
Sure.
driven by Halsey, but and by the nature of the man. But as we'll talk about a little bit later, when some of the subordinate commanders underneath him start questioning this decision, his staff is not doing a good job of either addressing the subordinate commanders' concerns nor doing what a good staff should do with the big poobah, which is to say, are you sure about this?
Mhm.
To be pushing discreetly but accurately against pressure points in that view to make sure that there's consensus around the decision that's been made. You don't see that. So yeah, it's a
Yeah.
problem.
Seth,
You,
I'll tell you that Halsey's been on the sidelines while a black shoe admiral had two great carrier battles, and I'm talking about Spruance,
yeah,
Midway. And in the case of Midway, Halsey's viewpoint is he handed Spruance Midway on a silver platter, and that should have been his. Talking about boils, his
yeah,
skin problem kept him from serving that one up, and then of course the turkey shoot. And there's this black shoe surface guy named Spruance who's getting all these carrier battle glories. Um, now he wants his, in my point of view. He's been waiting for this, but he lacked the ability to think, and this is going to get revealed today in our episode over and over again. He lacked the ability to think in terms of what we, warfighting planners call the operational level war. Halsey was a tactical admiral. He
mm,
was a checkers player in a world of chess. And this
interesting.
battle, there were just too many moving parts for him. In modern
Yeah.
parlance, he had shiny object syndrome. And as John just
It's
said,
true.
he
It's
repeatedly,
beautiful. No, it's a beautiful way of putting it. Yeah,
Squirrel,
uh,
squirrel.
yeah,
he repeatedly
right,
ignored his war council, and he acted as if he didn't even have one.
right.
And that's going to be revealed over and over again today too.
And yeah, and we're going to get to that, Bill, and John, to your point too. We're going to get to that because there's a couple of conversations that happen here in the very near future that are just blocked by his war council.
Yeah,
So earlier in the day, Halsey issued an order, and as I put in the notes, it's more like a statement, really, regarding the possible deployment of his fast battleships. Of course, this is Admiral Willis Lee's battle line. Should the Japanese emerge with a surface force to do battle yet again? Halsey stated that his 6 fast battleships plus 5 cruisers and 14 destroyers, which is a serious force, would be detached from 38 and would form an independent Task Force 34 under Admiral Willis Ching Lee. The purpose of Task Force 34 would be to, quote, engage decisively at long ranges. Of course, this is going to be the gun battle. This is the gun battle that all the
all the
battleship
nerds
ad,
want.
yeah,
How how many ex post facto, playthroughs of this war game have there been out there in wargaming land?
oh my
A
God,
bazillion.
yeah,
So
tons. Halsey was going to let Lee's battleships have their day, or as I put in the notes, have their way with with the remnants of the Imperial battle line. He sent this message to all subordinate Task Force 38 commanders and copied Nimitz and King on the message. Kind of like an email today to your boss. You're going to copy
yeah,
everybody to CYA.
yeah,
Halsey intended for the message to be, as Bill has put before, a warning order to prepare the ships designated for this task force in the event that Halsey felt he should issue said order. To further drive that point home, Halsey later stated, quote, if the enemy sorties through San Bernardino Strait, Task Force 34 will be formed when directed by me, unquote. Now, while that message from Halsey was not directed to 7th Fleet Admiral Kincaid received that message because it was essentially, I don't want to say it was sent in the clear, but it was sent in the clear amongst the top level American commanders. So Kincaid reads into this message too, and there's a whole separate level of confusion here that starts to build here. So, Bill, when Halsey gets the news that Ozawa is heading south, Task Force 38 is out of range. And as we said before, he wants this carrier battle, like you just said. But regardless of this, there's a lot of things that factor into this. Take us through some of this stuff here.
So what he's supposed to do when he issues a warning order is and have this execute order ready to go, transmit upon order, right? Or send the execute order and say, upon my order, you will execute the following plan.
Mm-hmm.
And again, as Jon said, a well-oiled machine staff gets all these things ready for the boss and has them queued up. And then they ping on him. Is it now, boss? Now, boss? Now, boss? None of that happens here. So when Halsey gets the news from that Ozawa's heading south, being the only enemy force with aircraft carriers, Halsey believes that Ozawa was the main striking force of the Japanese attack. That at that time now, there's so 3 separate Japanese forces converging on Leyte Gulf. You got the Southern Force, you got the Central Force, and you got this new force with Ozawa, right? This is where the chess comes into play, right? You got to have multiple chess moves, and he's not able to do that. He focuses on just the one he wanted to have happen. And so he turns his fleet north, and essentially leaves Admiral Oldendorf to deal with the Central Force at this point, right?
Well, yes and no. He leaves Oldendorf to deal with Southern Force because this is and
But
again,
he's still in the neighborhood.
Exactly. There's so much stuff going on here. This is why we broke this up into as many episodes as we did. Is that Surigao Strait technically hasn't happened yet at this moment,
Right?
And Oldendorf is going to be there, like we talked about last week with Tony. They're the plug in that bottle, and of course, obviously, they're the immovable plug. It's there's a lot of supposition that's involved in a lot of these decisions that Halsey makes, and because he doesn't confer with other people there, he doesn't, and that's frankly a part of the major problem here. So, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, I mean, Oldendorf, of course, is going to be in the neighborhood, right?
Sure.
And I'm kicking myself because I could open up Google Earth and just like measure the distance from Surigao Strait up to the Leyte landing beaches. I'm going to take a guess here. I don't think it's more than 40 or 50, maybe 60 nautical miles. It's not real far at all. And so Halsey may be thinking to himself that, well, I got Oldendorf, relatively close by, and he should be able to cover both threats if need be. If so, that's a little bit of a misreading on his part because he would be pitting slow battleships against fast battleships, and he ought to know that they will have depleted a large percentage of their AP loadout in the course of doing this gunnery shoot tonight against Shima's oncoming Southern Force. I think that there's some mirror imaging going on here too, in that Halsey, being a carrier admiral, just instinctually says, well, if there's an enemy carrier force, that has got to be the main striking force of the enemy. Not understanding that if you look at the intel that you should have available to you, you should know that we've beaten the enemy carriers to pieces at this point, and it's quite possible that actually the main striking force for the enemy is Kurita. And that's who we ought to be going after. But he can't make that jump, as you say. Squirrel, and that's what he gets focused on. Exactly. I find it fascinating that this is, practically the only occasion during this entire war where the Japanese Navy's predilection for distributed battle plans, multiple formations operating independently, actually works. That
really work.
They dangle the bait, and it's intentionally meant as bait, which is unusual because most of their forces previously had not been using a bait element, but this time this is deliberately what they're doing, and he just goes for it hook, line, and sinker.
Oh yeah, he snatches it up.
John, interestingly, you're right. I mean, they've overcomplicated their plans throughout the war, and almost always they've backfired. And here, way late in the war, almost too late, it finally works. But Halsey, first we could talk about all of his CYA that he does, particularly in his post-war book. But he's good friends with Mitcher, isn't he? And these guys should have been like on personal, just best terms where they communicate with each other regularly. Now, if, for whatever reason, Halsey puts himself on the New Jersey, a battleship.
Yeah.
And you know, so that does complicate their ability to consult with each other somewhat. But Mitcher had a pretty good idea what was going on here, didn't he?
He did, but to get back to the New Jersey thing, that may have had something to do with it, but truth be told, when Spruance wasn't riding Indy, he was riding Jersey. So it was a fleet flagship. But regardless of that, to your point earlier, yes, he and Mitcher were friends. If you will recall, I don't remember what episode it was, but Halsey's the one that calls Mitcher out from the barn and brings him into the Solomons as air saws after McCain goes and does his thing. So yeah, they are pals, but he, as we'll see, he doesn't even consult with Mitcher. He basically just cuts him out completely, which is rather odd because, as we said a couple weeks ago, really Mitcher is far more experienced than Halsey ever is.
Ton of experience by this point.
He's been doing this for 2 years already, constantly, mind you.
He hasn't had the time off that Halsey. The other thing is we're going to reveal a bunch of different personality quirks over the course of this battle that really have me wondering if there wasn't something wrong with Halsey as this was playing out. I'm just going to dangle that. We could revisit it later, but there's just so much that he screws up over the course of the next couple of days that you just wonder if there's something wrong with him. And one of them might be lack of sleep. But go ahead.
Which applies to the Japanese as well, as we'll get into. Anyway, go ahead, Seth.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So for all intents and purposes, it all boils down to the fact that Halsey is going to chase these carriers. He's going to, and we'll get into that conversation in just a second, which is going to leave San Bernardino Strait uncovered. As Bill said, Halsey post-battle, and not even post-war, like almost within a couple of days after this event is over, realizes, oh man, I probably made a boo-boo here, and he does, big time, and he does CYA. He sends a message to Nimitz after Samar, and he says, quote, searches by my carrier planes revealed the presence of the Northern Carrier Force, of course, this is Ozawa, on the afternoon of October 24, which completed the picture of enemy forces. As it seemed childish, this is Halsey's words, as it seemed childish to statically guard San Bernardino Strait, I concentrated Task Force 38 during the night and steamed north to attack the Northern Force at dawn. I believe the center force had been so heavily damaged in the Sibuyan Sea that it could no longer be considered a serious menace to 7th Fleet, unquote. There's a problem there. Go ahead, John.
Oopsie doopsie. Yeah, right. Yeah. He doesn't really have concrete information in his hands that would reveal the fact that Kurita's force has been heavily damaged. Yes, they are withdrawing, but as we know, they are only withdrawing temporarily to get out of the air envelope, and then they turn back around. So, yes, you can see the first plank in the CYA platform being built here.
Absolutely, because we know, and he knew too, by the way, that the night fighters, I forget from which carrier, Independence maybe, had spotted Kurita coming back through after Sibuyan Sea. So it was a known thing that they were they damaged? Yeah. But were they defeated? No, not even close.
Yeah, forget the Taffy force we're going to talk about here in a little bit. I mean, the main thing, this childish comment is churlish. How about that for alliteration? He, Spruance, to his credit, if he's criticized for withdrawing during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, it's because he knows the most important thing is to protect the landings on Saipan. And he's doing his best to make sure the main thing remains the main thing. In this case, we're talking about Leyte.
Yeah.
And it's like, forget all, he's completely lost.
Forget all that.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right.
I'm going after these carriers that many of my staff know are probably without airplanes. Right. I'm just going to go chase my, this dream that I've had about this major battle, for the last couple of wars. It's inexcusable. But he's already starting to circle the wagons, and that's going to continue on until his death, really.
Yeah.
And I mean, go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say, in terms of, yeah, again, the childish comment to statically, I love his usage of the word statically, because of
Mhm.
course we all want to be dynamic admirals, in motion kind of admirals, and yet if you look at the sheer geography of that strait, Lee's battleships could have done exactly the same number on Kurita that Oldendorf's are going to do in Surigao. This is a very narrow stretch of water. Willis Lee could absolutely have crossed the T of Kurita with, 6 state-of-the-art fast battleships, all of which have got good radar gunnery fire control, and absolutely minced them. And if you look at the overall, what do I want to say, just the percentage of forces that Willis Lee represents within Task Force 38 as a whole, as a fairly
Minimal.
nominal.
Yep.
Yeah, this is
Yep.
this is an easy way to cover my bets and not subtract a whit from my actual striking power, which is my air cover. Yes, it subtracts a little bit from my AA support for my ships. But again, given the intel reports I ought to have in hand regarding how many aircraft the Japanese have at their disposal, I'm going to be just fine with the destroyers and anti-aircraft cruisers and all that stuff that are around me.
Perfect segue to what we're going to talk about next, which is the lack of Japanese air power. So, in Halsey's mind, and he says this, in Halsey's mind, he did not know or was not told that the Japanese aircraft carriers were devoid, or they weren't devoid, but they're almost devoid of air power. According to Halsey, that intel was not crystal clear. However, that the fact that Japanese air power, naval air power on those carriers was essentially done is confirmed by Mitchell during the battle.
Mm.
Had he conferred with
Right.
Mark Mitchell, he might have found that out. The most high-ranking, that most of the high-ranking American naval officers felt that Imperial Japanese naval air power was kaput. They were done. But Halsey supposedly did not know that, and that, frankly, is key here, according to what he says. By issuing orders to Task Force 38 directly, this is Halsey doing this, and not going through Mitchell, he essentially cuts Mitchell out. And this goes back to what we were saying earlier. Why? Nobody can explain this. And Spruance, when Phil C started, we all know this. He takes command of the fleet. He does, and that's his prerogative. Same thing with Halsey. But he confers with Mark Mitchell, and he lets Mark
Yes.
Mitchell say, "I want to do this," and Spruance ultimately says no, and then of course later, as we know, says yes, and all this other stuff. Halsey doesn't even talk to him.
Yeah.
He doesn't even talk to him at all, and this is a huge, huge, huge problem. So another aspect, Bill, of Phil C that crept into Halsey's decision to chase these carriers is the fact that Phil C was seen as an incomplete victory. Tell us about some of this stuff. Let go into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I was referring to earlier, where
Right.
Spruance fails to chase the carriers after he wins the Marianas Turkey shoot, because Spruance is afraid to uncover the landings on Saipan, and the main objective will be lost then. So that leads Nimitz to reissuing a clarification of his general guidance, not specific orders, but a general guidance. And Nimitz says, and I'm not remembering exactly the words, but in essence, he says, if the opportunity presents itself to destroy the fleet, do that too.
There you
So,
go.
and so Halsey sees this as a provocation, a poke in the eye of Spruance. Maybe he never said that, but we could read into his, kind of body language. And so he doesn't want to make the same mistake. So he wants to go and attack the fleet. But there were a lot of fleets here. And myopically, the only ships that he considers the fleet worth going after were these empty aircraft carriers. How's that for single-mindedness of an aviator? My goodness. So, I mean, it just becomes, it's a lack of focus on the big picture, as I said earlier, Seth.
Yeah. So by taking his force north, by taking Task Force 38 north, which, by the way, includes the would-be Task Force 34, Halsey assumed that should Kurita show up again, which was doubtful in his mind, even though he has intel that they're probably still hanging around, they would not have the strength to do anything more than hit and run attacks, and even then they could be handled by Kincaid. That's a lot of supposition. And that's all fine if you
If you
let
communicate.
Kincaid, yeah, thank you. Yeah, which he does not do. He does
Right.
not do at all. So the question now is, even thinking that Ozawa was the main threat, why didn't Halsey leave Task Force 34 at San Bernardino? Why does he just take it with him? To your point earlier, Bill, or even if 34 is left, or John, I'm sorry, even if 34 is left behind, 38 is, yeah, they're diminished, but not that friggin' much.
Yeah.
So why does he leave, or why does he not leave these battleships and cruisers behind? That's, it's curious. But Bill, you're a big Mahanian doctrine guy, and the thought, I'm not saying I agree with this, but the thought is it's all based on Halsey's training in doctrine and training coming from the Naval Academy. What do you think of this?
Yeah, I'm not buying it, Seth. I'm sorry. Yeah, what you're referring to is the concentration force, or in Clausewitzian terms, the principle of war called mass.
Hmm.
And Halsey felt that Task Force 38 would be best able to achieve victory if it remained intact, except the enemy wasn't intact. The enemy was divided, and you need to cover the enemy. The enemy, the old saying that no plan survives contact with the enemy applies here. And so, if the enemy's divided, you can't keep your force the same. You can't chase it on north and then have three different enemies. Well, you need to assure yourself that, and this has to be within clarity of command by either issuing specific orders or issuing contingency plans that if this thing happens, you do that. You
Yeah.
need to assure yourself. And the other war planning concept Army guys will resonate with this is called branches and sequels. There's a very formal process you go through that basically outlines the different potential courses of action of the enemy and what sequel, what plan you're going to put in place to offset that potential course of action. And again, good staffs do this. I have evidence that Spruance did this mentally, even if he didn't maybe say it explicitly where I'm saying it now. But I have zero evidence that Halsey thought this way, guys.
Well, and this points to a larger issue. I forget who made this comment, but by this point in the war, I don't know that it's an open secret, but there are senior officers, or I should say at the skipper level, the admiral level, who are like, man, Spruance has got much the better staff than
Oh,
Halsey
yeah.
at this point. And it's just kind of a known thing that Spruance's staff was a well-oiled machine and just could hammer through this kind of stuff. And yeah, Halsey's group
But
was just not as good.
And it was also
But
twice
John,
the
I would
size,
present
too.
that, yeah, and I would present that that didn't happen organically. That they became a better staff because they were trained to be a
Right.
better staff.
Mhm.
They operated with the proper processes,
Yeah.
and that's what made him a better staff. Of course, Spruance did a lot of brainstorming with his people, and then disengage, and people thought, does he know what's going on at all? But but very, very different personality than Halsey.
Right.
Maybe that required him to have a better staff, whereas Halsey was much more dictatorial, much more, I would say, declarative. He
Yeah.
would say, "This is what we're doing," without much conversation or discussion. So the staff would necessarily just say, "What's the point? Let's just disengage." He's making all the decisions anyway,
Yeah.
and so
And
why
and
do we
and you
even worry about this stuff? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, you do find both styles of leadership out there, and both
Mhm.
styles can be successful. I mean, again, reaching for my big bag of 1942 analogs, you look at a general like Montgomery, he's very much in the Halsey camp. He is declarative, orders are to be followed, they are not to be, bandied about. I've got my chief of staff, Freddie DeGuinan. He's expert at planning. We're going to put all these things together for you, and we're going to hand it down, and this is what you're going to do. Whereas I think if you look at a guy like Nimitz, he was openly collaborative. He wanted
Mhm.
the input from his subordinate staff members, and obviously that was a very successful package too. So yeah, the problem is at this point, I'm certainly not the first person that said this. Many people have said this. You've already alluded to it, Seth. this war has just become too big and too complex for William Halsey to manage. It really is a management question at this point.
It is, and we talked about that when we did the Formosa air battle.
Right.
It's like he almost at one point bit off more than he could chew. Not that 38 couldn't handle it, because we already know the results of that. But he got himself into a couple of situations, specifically with Crypt Div 1, that, it was like,
Unanticipated.
yeah, and it was a little more of well, it wasn't a little more, it was a lot more of a response from the Japanese that he had ever anticipated,
Yeah.
or that he had ever seen. Because again, we made this point, I forget, in an earlier episode, where we said this is the first fleet command Bill Halsey has had since 1942. And the war has progressed in such a way, it has grown in such a scope and a scale, and it's a lot faster, and it's a lot more modern, and it's 10 times as large. And it's not just our forces that are larger, Japanese too, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a different
Yeah.
world than it was in
Right.
42. It's a different world.
Yeah.
So all that being said, once Halsey does make his decision, and I put in the notes, it was a knee-jerk reaction, and it was. Once he hears that these carriers are out there, it's like, oh, we're going, and that's it. We're going to go get these guys right now. And that was vintage Bill Halsey. He didn't put a lot of thought into a lot of things. He just like, oh, ow,
React.
kill it. Yeah, let's go kill it, and kill it now. And to certain extents, that's fine. Obviously, that worked off of Guadalcanal and
Yeah.
Rabaul, or not Rabaul. Well, yeah, Rabaul. But again, the war has changed here. But once he makes that decision, a lot of his subordinates, and this is where we were talking about earlier, start to have some serious questions about this, because they're looking at the same maps, they're looking at the same intel reports that Halsey's looking at, or theoretically Halsey's looking at, and they're going, these Japanese that we thought we had defeated earlier, they're not
Advancing
going.
again.
Yeah, they're coming back. And the scouting report is relatively accurate as to what they see. So specifically, Admirals Bogan and Davison are some of the ones that start raising questions initially. Halsey sends a message from New Jersey to these two guys to raise steam to 25 knots and follow them at 38.3. All three task groups, remember, as I said, one is still on their way back from Ulithi. They're going to play a part in this too, would run north after Ozawa. It was at this time that Kincaid was informed by Halsey that he was going north. Nothing was said about San Bernardino Strait or Task Force 34. In his message to Kincaid, Halsey says, and I quote, proceeding north with 3 groups to attack carrier force at dawn, unquote. He neglected to inform Kincaid that Task Force 34 was not formed, nor would it be for San Bernardino. And as I put in the notes now, part of that could be Kincaid's fault because he never even asked. Not right now, anyway. So after he gives his orders, and this is huge, after he gives his orders, Halsey goes to his cabin and goes to sleep because he hadn't slept in over 48 hours, which might also be part of this problem.
Right.
So once he hits the sack, no one wakes him. And I liken this to nobody wants to wake the Fuhrer on D-Day and let him know that, hey, there's some boots on the ground over here you might want to take a look at here, Chief. Same kind of situation here. And this goes on to Willis Lee, whom we all admire and adore, sends a message to New Jersey. And he says, he reads the same messages, and assuming that he's going to be handed orders to form 34 and block the strait, he tries repeatedly to get Halsey, to no avail. Can't get him. Why? Because the old man's asleep. Yeah. When he asked if 3rd Fleet Command, which means Halsey obviously, had taken note of the recent sightings of Kurita, all that was said over the TBS was a simple Roger. And that's it. And at that point, Willis Lee, Mark Mitcher, Bogan, Davison, they're all like, well, he must know something that we don't know. So you know what? Let's just do what the boss says and let's just go. And, you were talking about, John, a staff issue. And I agree that it's a combination of the two. And it's generally assumed that the man that basically he was a yes man was a guy named Mick Carney. That was Halsey's chief of staff. He was the guy, and he's they called him these are the same guys that were with Halsey since 42.
Right.
Not unlike MacArthur, really, and his Bataan gang. It's the same kind of thing here. But he rarely went against Halsey. If Halsey said, it's noon and I'm going to eat breakfast now. And Mick was like, what do you want? Do you want eggs? He never
Yep.
would ask anything outside of the ordinary. So it is assumed, and I'm not going to pin the moniker on him, but it is assumed that he was the yes man that just said, don't wake the boss, leave him sleeping. He's going to do what he needs to do because he knows what's supposed to happen. And
And there's the difference. Because you think back to the Battle of Midway. As soon as Spruance issues his orders on the evening of June 4th that we're going to pull out of range and make sure that we stay at arm's length in case the Japanese are gunning for us tonight, he too goes to his cabin and hits the rack. But he says, why should I not sleep soundly? I had a good staff. They would know what to do. In other words, I am comfortable delegating to that staff independence of action to act on my behalf, to act. And that's the important thing. Whereas you get the sense from this staff of enormous passivity and not willing to act and to stick their necks out on the boss's behalf. I mean, a good staff would have responded to those queries from subordinate commanders, I would think. Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, and told them, here are the contingency plans. Here's what we're seeing. It elaborated a little more elaboration, please, than just Roger. That's not going to get it done.
Absolutely. Every commanding officer writes what's called night orders before you go to sleep. Here's my night orders. And
Didn't
one
know
of the
that.
key premises, there's a statement that's in every CO's night orders and every admiral's night orders, but for that matter is, if the situation changes, wake me.
Yeah.
It's just standing. Talk about Navy doctrine. That is Navy doctrine. They didn't do it here.
yeah, and I'm not trying to pass the buck on Halsey because ultimately he's the guy that's making these decisions. But I think unfairly, it's all been pinned on him in the past, and it wasn't all him. I think it was a failure of multiple factions that contributed to his ultimate goof here,
Yeah.
to put it very, very nicely. The
Yeah.
fact that you've got two of your carrier task group commanders radioing you saying, are you sure you want to do this? You got Admiral Willis Lee, who's been around the block a time or two, literally the whole friggin' war, saying, are you sure you want to do this? And I think there were a couple more in there that were, they were pinging Mitcher. And then Mitcher saying, are you sure you want to do this? And nobody goes and wakes the old man and say, hey, you got 4 or 5 of your task group commanders here saying, I think you're making a mistake.
Yeah.
Therein
Yeah.
lies the problem. It really
Well,
does.
and as I put in the notes too, of course, ex post facto, the Japanese are absolutely incredulous about this as well. Kurita's chief of staff, who we're going to be talking about a little more in this episode, a guy named Koyanagi, wrote after the war, I still cannot understand how the enemy, with his highly developed intelligence system, so badly overestimated Ozawa's force of 2 old battleships, 1 regular carrier, 3 light carriers, 3 light cruisers, and 10 destroyers. And just absolutely mystified that you guys could have fallen for the bait this badly. It was such a wimpy little force. And when you think about it, back in the day, Kido Butai would bring 4 or 6 fleet carriers to the party. They're down to just Zuikaku at this point and some has-beens.
Yeah. What we're dancing around here is the concept of forceful backup. When a ship gets into trouble and they relieve the captain, they'll frequently relieve the XO, maybe the navigator if they run aground, because the whole point is there's multiple failures. What you're both talking about here is there are multiple failures need to happen in order for something to go this badly. Now the commander is overall responsible, and you got to lay it at the commander's feet. And in this case, that's Halsey. But there are a bunch of other people who failed to exercise forceful backup who were equally responsible, but not equally culpable. I'll say it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whoever is to blame, or the multiple people, Kurita's still coming. He's still coming. And there ain't a dang thing that anybody can do about it at this point in stage. Kurita's force had been pounding along since just after sunset, speeding through the waters at about 20 knots. I say speeding, but for a large task force, that's moving pretty good. As he neared San Bernardino Strait, he feared another submarine attack, rightfully so, like he had endured at Palawan. And instead of ordering his ships to slow through the strait, he increased speed to 24 knots. He's like, nope, not going to happen again. Boom, go.
So he knows better than a lot of American surface warfare guys that speed is life in an ASW fight. So speed up, don't slow down.
Well, he learned that the hard way. He learned that the hard way, yeah.
Well, and to an extent, of course, that is also dictated by the geography of the strait. I can't zigzag very effectively in this thing. I just haven't got the water to play with. And so, put the pedal to the metal and let's go. 24 knots is as fast as Nagato can go. I mean, that's the absolute top end for her. So yeah, she's at flank speed and trying to get through this strait.
Yeah. So the night is clear with perfect visibility. The navigation lights in the strait had been turned on for the Japanese. Worried about submarines and the fact that Halsey's night scouts had seen him, which he knew they had, Kurita was absolutely flabbergasted when he emerged from San Bernardino Strait unscathed at 0030. And thank you for catching that mistake, Bill, because I would have looked like an ass. So thank you very much. Into open waters. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was tired, man. It found no enemy ships waiting for him. Even Ugaki aboard Yamato was surprised at the lack of American ships in the strait. He'd expected a fight and felt that the American battleships would give Center Force, quote, a hard time, but was pleasantly surprised at the lack of gunfire directed at him. At 0530, Kurita receives word of Nishimura's demise in Surigao Strait from Shima. Kurita now knows that if he's got to force his way into if he's going to go into Leyte, he's going to do it alone. And John, and we said this last week, that was part of the plan, though, wasn't it?
Right. Yeah. I'm going to try to channel my inner Tony Tully here and just say that, Shima's job really was to do the same thing that Ozawa was doing, namely to pull away Oldendorf's battleships to the south, thereby exposing the landing beaches for Center Force to come on. And, he did accomplish that mission because when it hits the fan later on, Oldendorf is going to be like, you want me to be up in Leyte Gulf now? That's a problem.
Yeah.
So
significant problem.
Yeah.
Unknown to Kurita, there were American ships that were going to block his way in the Leyte Gulf, but they damn sure weren't the ships that he was expecting to meet. Bill, let's talk about 77.4 under the command of Rear Admiral Thomas L. Sprague. Who are these guys?
A large, if not overly powerful group consisting of 6 escort carriers,
16.
CVE.
16
escort carriers, CVEs, with 22 destroyers and some destroyer escorts as escorts. Screen and destroyer escorts are smaller. Many of these DDs had 5, count them, 5 5-inch guns, which is pretty incredible. But even the DEs would carry 2 5-inch guns on average, but they're much smaller, much slower. The group was divided into 3 subunits known by their call signs Taffy 1, Taffy 2, and Taffy 3. Of the subunits, the group known as Taffy 3 was the northernmost of all, and hence the closest to San Bernardino Strait, guys.
Yeah. And I just realized I screwed up. Ziggy is actually Clifton Sprague, who's the commander of Taffy 3, not Thomas Sprague, his superior. So my bad there.
No relation either, by the way.
No relation. Yeah.
Kind of an odd last name, and yet they're not even remotely closely related.
Multiple Spragues.
Yeah. Lots of Spragues. So Taffy 3 consists of 6 CVEs, and we'll talk about these ships in a minute. Fanshawe Bay, St. Lo, White Plains, Kalinin Bay, Kitkin Bay, and Gambier Bay. Screening these small, slow escort carriers were 3 destroyers, USS Hoel, DD-533, USS Heerman, DD-532, and USS Johnston, DD-557. The Fletcher-class destroyers were accompanied by, as Bill was saying, the 4 smaller, slower destroyer escorts named USS Dennis, USS John C. Butler, USS Raymond, and Samuel B. Roberts. The point of a force like Taffy 3 is not to do battle with the Imperial Japanese Navy. They are to protect the transports from roving Japanese aerial attacks and provide aerial support to the troops ashore on Leyte. Taffy 3 was never meant to tangle with fleet units by any way, stretch or mind. The largest rifle the ships possessed were the 5-inch guns that Bill was talking about on the destroyers and the destroyer escorts and the CVEs, by the way. And those, as we know, could never punch through a belt armor of a battleship at any kind of range. The carriers held a small composite air group, but combined, all 6 CVEs of Taffy 3 had 165 aircraft, which was roughly equivalent to 2 fleet carriers. And if you combine everything together, John, it's a significant amount of birds.
And this is where Jon the contrarian rears his ugly head and says, this is a very formidable force, even though it doesn't look like it on paper. Okay. So between all 16 of these CVEs, there are more than 400 aircraft on this force. And I would argue that it has superior redundancy and warfighting capability in some respects than a fast carrier task force. And hear me out on that. So, 400 aircraft, that's roughly 4 fleet carriers worth, right? But I've got it distributed on 16 light carriers that, yeah, they're slow, but it's going to be very, very difficult for the Japanese to singly track down and sink all of these air handling units. And if you look at them as a platform for landing, refueling, rearming, and taking off aircraft. Okay, so in the historical battle, the Japanese are going to end up sinking 2 of these puppies. It's not inconceivable that if, let's say that they had run into a force of 4 fleet carriers, yeah, those fleet carriers have got superior top end. It would have been tougher for them, for the Japanese to catch those fleet carriers. But if they had landed a few lucky hits during the outset, during the surprise phase of the engagement, and disabled 1 or 2 of those fleet carriers, they essentially would have knocked out half of the aircraft capacity of that fleet. As opposed to, if I kill 2 of these 16 Jeep carriers, I really haven't damaged the overall capacity of that fleet all that much. The analog I would use here, this is kind of like the drone warfare that we see in Ukraine today. Lots of little platforms, lots of stuff up in the air. So I feel like when we look at this battle, there's a tendency to overfocus on the heroics of the gun action, which, don't get me wrong, I mean, the escorts here, as we're going to go through, are just insanely brave. Again, the bravery dial is absolutely at 11 on these guys. But if you're Kurita coming in against an enemy force, I don't want to tangle with 400 airplanes. Okay. And that's what's going to happen here. So, from my way of looking at it, a lot of conventional accounts that say, oh my God, it was miraculous that these guys even escaped. Like, it's not a miracle at all. 400 airplanes, I don't want to mess with that. That's the reason the battle goes down the way it goes down. So, I've thrown my control.
No, you're 100% right. And we're going to prove that theory throughout this, because a lot of popular accounts of this event focus on, and don't get me wrong, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to focus on Johnston and Sammy B and Hoel and Heerman and all that stuff, because you have to.
Right?
Exact. Thank you. Yes, you have to.
Right. This is the seminal book on the battle, Jim Hornfisher's Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors. And some of this reveals what I think is sort of a weakness of mine as in terms of being an historian, in that I've never been a human stories guy. I hate to admit it. Seth, that's one of the things that you do so well. You knew these people, and so you're able to tell those stories. I've always been this kind of big picture, operational level synthesis kind of dude who's asking, well, why did this battle turn out the way it did? What's going on under the hood here? Unfortunately, that means that I don't write the kind of stuff that grips human beings, which are human stories, in the way that, authors like Jim or James Scott, I would trot him out as another example of somebody who can really tell that sort of human angle in a compelling way. But from my perspective, again, just at the operational and tactical level, the fact that Kurita is going up against 400 airplanes, that's the driving force here.
Absolutely. And that informs everything he does. Go ahead, Bill. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, John, I wondered why you reminded me of Robert McNamara, but now I know. You're an operations analyst and not I know that stung, John. I know that stung, but that's why it's fun.
Yeah, that's just kind of my shtick. That's just what I do, and I don't know.
But we are all about destroying the mythology wherever we find it. And that doesn't mean that the bravery didn't exist and
Oh
wasn't
God,
as
no. Yeah.
profound as we're going to talk about it. But here we are, an hour into this podcast, and we haven't begun the battle yet.
No, I'm
And
sorry.
What we
no,
do.
no. This is important stuff. Getting into the minds of Halsey, figuring out, unpacking why this went down the way it went down, and why these heroes had to sacrifice so much in order to prevail in this battle, and why the airplanes who got so little credit for the outcome made such a big difference in the outcome.
Yeah.
And that's what I started to say, is that the conventional knowledge of this event is that the destroyers and the DEs go in there and they shoot them up and fling torpedoes at them, and that gives Kurita pause, and to an extent it does.
It does.
But what people don't seem to understand is that while Johnston is doing this, while Sammy B is doing her deal, Kurita's being attacked by aircraft the entire freaking time, the whole damn time. And that is what is more, as we're going to see, we're going to get to it. I promise you, I swear to God, we're going to get there. You're going to see how much damage is actually done by the DEs and the DDs as compared to the aircraft. It's not even close. But anyway.
Which makes it a three-dimensional battle. And getting back to John's operational analysis, when you double the impact of a three-dimensional battle, it's 2 to the third power. It's 8 times more effective. So adding those airplanes severely complicates the Kurita's defense.
Right.
So let's briefly talk about these CVEs, because it's important, because we haven't talked about these aircraft carriers, to my knowledge, at all yet. We talk about the CVLs, the Independence class, that are traveling with the Big Blue Fleet, that can keep up with these fast carriers, and that can throw a hell of a lot of aircraft in the air. Independence, Bella Wood, Cabot, ships like that. But these CVEs are not the same kind of animal, like not even close, man.
Nope.
These are, they're known as the Kaiser coffins, is what the guys called them who sailed aboard these things, because not all of them, mind you, but a lot of them were built by Kaiser shipyards in California, in Richmond, California, which, by the way, the shipyards part of it is still there. If you ever get the chance to see it, check it out. It's pretty cool. They were useful because of the speed in which they were built. They were generally built on
standardized Liberty ship hulls. Yeah,
Liberty ships.
I forget if this is a C3 hull. I should know this, but this is a byproduct of our enormous Liberty shipbuilding program. We've got these shipyards stoked up. I can take the same damn hull, build it up, put a flight deck on it, ba-boom, instant air handling platform. They are slow, top end of about 18 knots. They only have a handful of 5-inch guns on them, maybe some Oerlikons. So they are very weak vessels from a defensive standpoint, but they operate a composite air group of between 22 and 26 aircraft, which are evenly split between fighters. The FM2, is that right, Seth?
Yeah, FM2 Wildcat, yep.
And TBF Avengers, which is a big, beefy torpedo plane. And lo and behold, all of these things have got at least some loadout of torpedoes in their magazines. And so if you look at the number of torpedo planes that these 3 Taffys put together, it is over 200. Again, that's a fairly scary thing to be facing up against if you are a surface force with no air cover of your own.
And they don't have a lick.
Right.
So another thing to make note of on these CVEs, and this is important, and this will come to play here in a little while, is they are considered unarmored. Obviously, they have some armor, but they're nothing compared to an Essex or a battleship or a cruiser or anything like that, which means that if they get hit by a large caliber AP round, be it 16-inch, 14-inch, 18.1-inch, the chances of that shell detonating inside of one of these carriers is somewhere between slim and none. Not that it doesn't happen, but it's between slim and none. In other words, they're going to go through and through, which could actually
they're basically built out of they're built out of tinfoil. They're not going to trip. Not going to trip the fuse.
Which can be a benefit. So
now the other thing, the reason they're not armored is because they have a metacentric height problem, which means they're unstable. What that means is they tend to roll because they put this big flight deck on top of something that wasn't designed for a big flight deck to be on it. So that adds to all of the other weaknesses these ships are going to display during this battle.
Yeah.
So on to the battle now, finally, after an
Woo,
hour.
unbelievable.
So as dawn breaks, Taffy 3 is launching their morning combat air patrol for the transport fleet Their combat air patrol is 12 FM2s. And to clarify what John was saying earlier, the FM2 is basically just a hopped up version of the F4F Wildcat of 1942 vintage. It's actually a very, very, very good fighter plane, by the way.
Mhm.
After they launch their 12 FM2s, they launch an additional 2 FM2s and 4 Avengers for anti-submarine patrol around the task group. SOP, standard operating procedures, what you do every single day.
Actually, I'm going to tank us here again. Tell me, I'm not an aircraft nerd to that extent. FM2 versus F4F. What are the differences? What makes it as good a plane as it apparently was? New engine?
Yes, exactly. A significantly more powerful engine. It's got a lot more power. It's got a lot more speed. The F4F was not a Buffalo, I mean, it wasn't,
Right.
and by that
No.
I'm referring to a Brewster Buffalo. It
Yeah,
was a
no.
maneuverable aircraft. It just didn't have the oomph to do
Right.
what it needed to do in the best situation. It was a rugged airplane. It was flown by masters, and that's why it had the kill ratio that it did. The FM2 is that same bird with just a lot more horsepower and a lot more balls, really, more than
Yeah.
anything else. So
Okay.
it's the
Cool.
same
Nice.
airframe, just a lot more juice to it. So you got a good airplane, and now it's even better.
Yeah.
So the first indications that something is amiss happens around 0630 when one of Taffy 3's anti-submarine patrol aircraft picks up Japanese voices on the short-range radio in the airplane, thinking that the voices could be coming from one of the nearby islands. Now, you got to remember, you're surrounded by, and you're in an archipelago here. It's basically blown off. In other words, like, who knows what that was? Nobody cares. Let's just keep on going. Minutes later, an SG radar set aboard one of the CVEs picks up a surface contact of something approaching from the north. Several blips appear on the screen, but they did not resemble anything like a fleet. At 0646, lookouts aboard Gambier Bay spotted what looked like AAA bursts on the northern horizon. Indeed, that was odd. Yes, there was no known force over there. There was no reason for AAA to be bursting in the skies in that area. So Ziggy Sprague, who sees the burst with his own eyes, orders one of the airborne anti-sub patrol aircraft to go investigate what the hell that source of fire is. At the exact same time that lookouts spotted the AAA, an Avenger pilot from Gambier Bay from neighboring Taffy 2 spotted and attacked the leading elements of Kurita's center force. As the pilot pulled away, Japanese AAA exploded behind him. Uh-oh.
Mhm.
Uh-oh.
I'm just mentally, what must that have felt like if you're the radar operator? Like,
Yeah,
what's that on the northern horizon there? That ain't good.
that ain't cool, man.
Yeah.
Bill, tell us about Bill Brooks from USS St. Lo.
Well, he was airborne in the vicinity of the AAA bursts, which is a bad place to be. Heading towards the Puffs, he looked down and saw the last thing he expected to see: a formation of warships, large warships, including battleships. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if he was confused about where his own disposition forces was. Are these ours? Are they there? He said, maybe they're from Third Fleet. Thank God they're on our side. I think that would have been a natural initial reaction.
Sure.
Just in case he decided to turn around and look again with a tinge of doubt. And as he did so, he got a better look at the ship's below. But from 12,000 feet, the contours of the ships did not look like any battleship he had ever seen. Didn't look like the New Jersey flying along unmolested. He stared at the ships and began to make out their masts. Pagoda masts. These were Japanese ships, Seth.
Yeah. Boy, you got to talk about a pucker moment, huh? Good.
That's just gonna burst.
Yeah. Bring me
Yeah.
my brown pants. But
Yeah, right.
swear, almost at the same time, the AAA burst started exploding around his airplane. One assumes that this is what Ziggy Sprague sees. Looking down through the growing fire that is intensifying as he's twirling around up there, he could see the long white wakes of the big ships. These guys, as I put in the notes, are hauling ass. They are moving. They are only 20 miles from Taffy 3 at this point. He keys his mic, Bill Brooks keys his mic and delivers the news, quote, enemy surface force of 4 battleships, 4 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 10 to 12 destroyers sighted 20 miles northwest of your task group and closing in on you at 30 knots, unquote.
And yeah, one of the things that struck me there is just what, we in the course of this series, we've gone through a lot of crappy sighting reports together, haven't we now?
Yes, indeed. Indeed.
And this sighting report is just absolutely right on the money, because the Japanese force at this point is 4 battleships, Yamato, Nagato, Haruna, and Kongo, 6 heavy cruisers, not 4, but that's not bad. Chokai, Haguro, Kumano, Suzuya, Chikuma, and Tone, 2 modern light cruisers in Yahagi and Noshiro, and 11 destroyers, including my all-time fave, the Shimakaze, which is one of the fastest destroyers in the world at 42 knots, and carries a formidable battery of 15 long lances in 3 quintuple batteries. The thing about her, though, is she is loaded with survivors at this point from Musashi and others that were picked up in Sibuyan Strait. And so she's actually sort of at the back of the formation and isn't really going to get into it today. But anyway, tremendously good sighting report on the part of Mr. Brooks. And now, Ziggy and his subordinates have got the hot dope in their hands.
Indeed.
And it ain't good.
It is not good. And they initially don't. Ziggy Sprague is like, he doesn't believe it. He's like, which you can understand why he doesn't believe it, because there isn't supposed to be anybody out there, much less a Japanese battle force.
You're sure that's not New Jersey? You're looking at, Sonny boy?
And that is exactly what he thinks. He thinks that this is some young stick who doesn't know what the hell he's looking at. He tells, well, he doesn't, but he issues orders to Brooks to basically confirm your sighting, get your ass down there, and make sure you're not looking at Bill Halsey in the New Jersey. So Brooks, who just got shot at by these people, is a little hot himself. He takes his airplane down amidst the heavy AAA to a height of 2,000 feet. One of his crewmen,
this is crazy. This is crazy.
One of his crewmen, a guy named Ray Travers, snaps pictures of the fleet below, which are in the archives, and I'll show now.
Oh, really?
Some of those pictures are available. While Brooks replotted the enemy force's course and speed, angered at having to reaffirm something he already knew, he keys his mic and says, and I quote, "I can see pagoda masts and I see the biggest red meatball flag I ever saw flying on the biggest battleship I ever saw," unquote.
He's looking right at who. He's looking at Yamato. Has to be.
Yep. So, Bill, Ziggy Sprague just had his morning ruined.
Yes.
Filled with dread, I would say. Against battleships and cruisers, he knew his Taffy 3 didn't stand a chance in hell from a surface-to-surface point of view. His destroyers and destroyer escorts, with a gun range of only 7 miles on those 5-inch 38s, would be blown from the sea by the longer-range battleships of 18-inch versus 5-inch? I think they're outgunned right there before they ever had a chance to shoot back. And while the battleships were a concern, Sprague was actually more worried about the heavy cruisers bearing down on him, because with their speed, they would outrun Taffy 3, particularly those very slow CVEs, and annihilate them if they didn't eviscerate them first with long lance torpedoes. So this was a multidimensional threat. The Japanese didn't have air cover. John, I beat you at you, and you were going to say that, which is going to be a big, big, big deal as it comes up, because we did. However, there's still a multidimensional threat here, and everybody knows about those long lances. And finally, they're beginning to worry about them.
Yeah, finally. So, like you were saying, Bill, the Japanese heavy cruisers are really the larger concern,
problem.
Yes, for sure. So Sprague acts quickly. He acts very quickly, immediately broadcasting a contact report to everyone in the vicinity, and even those outside of the vicinity, He also requested air support from the nearby Taffys, which he will get. After sending out his communications, he turns his group east into the wind and ordered them to work up to flank speed as much as you can.
Whatever that is.
Yeah, get out the oars and start rowing, boys. He
Yeah.
also ordered that every aircraft that is spotted on the decks loaded with bombs or not be launched immediately.
Yep.
So, John, let's get into this air activity that we talked about just a minute ago here.
Yeah, and I sort of put this in the notes when I was going through here, and we're going to be doing a cool 10 pages worth of boom boom bang bang on what happens on the surface. But again, my contention is that it's really the stuff in the air that is the driving force behind this battle.
Agreed.
And Sprague acts absolutely as he should, get every bird up in the air, whether it's armed properly or not. Among other things, that's a passive damage control measure. I want to get these planes out of my hangars, get them up in the air. But these planes are just going to cause all manner of havoc with Kurita from basically this time out. I mean, these two, the gunnery action and the air action, essentially happen almost simultaneously. As soon as I can get my birds up, they go. And what they're going to be doing in a lot of cases is not all that much overt damage to start with, but they are going to be doing a lot of strafing attacks on these Japanese warships. They are going to be doing torpedo runs. In many cases, the torpedo planes, again, to start, don't have torpedoes on them. The Japanese don't know that. If you have a flight of 4 or 5 TBF Avengers boring in on you and it looks like that is going to be a torpedo attack, you have to react if you're a Japanese skipper. And the way you're going to react to that is you're going to turn away from those incoming planes, put them on your stern, and hope to comb whatever wakes, come your way. That has a twofold effect on this battle. The first is, of course, it chops your overall speed of advance for the formation down because I'm constantly having to, dodge away from these fake or real torpedo attacks. There's one episode later in the battle where some of the destroyer escorts put torpedoes in the water towards Yamato. Our torps are not particularly fast. Yamato has to turn away from them, and then Ugaki, who's in command of Battleship Division 1, is describing how he's standing on the bridge of Yamato, watching these torpedoes on either side slowly overtake a ship, and move out of range. That's 10 minutes that Yamato is obliged to be running away from the American force before she can finally turn around and start to re-engage. So that drastically chopped the overall speed of advance of the Japanese force. The other thing it does is every time I make one of those radical maneuvers with my ships to avoid an air attack or a torpedo attack, I throw my fire control solution from my main battery out the window. Again, these ships are using old style analog computers to generate these fire control solutions to figure out, okay, where does my shell have to hit in order to intercept, be at the right place at the right time. One of the things that they do not do a good job of is handling large rate change inputs. So I'm constantly inputting enemy's course, my course, yada, yada. If I do a radical maneuver, all of a sudden these dudes are twisting the dials up there. It's like, what the hell is my base course? I don't even know anymore. Mm-hmm. So until I can take my warship back, settle it down on some reasonably constant base course, I can't shoot worth beans. So it's the air activity that's going to be going on around Kurita during this whole time that is going to make it very difficult for him to actually come to grips with his enemy, and B, particularly for the heavy units in Bat Divs 1 and 2, it's going to be difficult for them to shoot accurately enough to hit that enemy. So that's what's going on here.
And one of the other misconceptions about this battle too, aside from what you just laid out for us, is that Taffy 3 was doing this alone.
Right.
That she was the only task force out there that was fighting the Japanese alone. That could not be more inaccurate if you tried.
Right.
All 3 Taffys get into the fight.
Yes.
Specifically Taffy 2. Taffy 2 like really, really gets into the fight, and we'll get into their actions here in a little bit. But they are supported the entire time throughout the entire ordeal by all the aircraft that is physically available from every single CVE in the area, which is 1, 2, and 3, and then we're going to see some other action later on. They were nearly unending aerial attacks on Kurita, beginning at 0730. Over 440 sorties were flown against Kurita. 400, which is more than was flown against him by Task Force 38 and Civilian Sea 2 days before.
Right. That's right.
Think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
So
cool.
Sprague,
we set our piece. Now we can do the boom, boom, bang, bang.
Now we can get into the shooting. So Sprague then, after he orders all the birds to get off the deck, he then orders his destroyers and destroyer escorts astern to lay smoke. And the CVEs also do the same thing. At that moment, after he launches his airplanes, that's about all he can do. At 0659, any lingering doubt that Sprague may have had were gone when large shell splashes began erupting astern of the fleeing CVEs. John, can you give us an indication of what the Japanese are thinking and or doing at this moment?
Okay, so they are just as surprised by this turn of affairs as the two Spragues are. They had not expected to encounter any American warships anywhere in this vicinity. They assumed that they were going to press on south, will make it into the transport anchorage, and that's when the shooting's going to start. But no, here they are still, 20, 30 miles away from that anchorage or more. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, they've run across this American force, and they don't know what it is to start with. They can tell it's carriers of some sort. And here's where there's some sort of, what do I want to say?
Disconnect?
Disconnect, willful disbelief, if you will. Kurita and his senior officers are all really grumpy about being ordered to fight this apparently suicidal mission that is going to end up in a gunfire shoot against a bunch of transport. That is just not what this force was designed to do. And so in their minds, it was essential that if there was any opportunity to fight a battle against the American carrier force, which they correctly identified as the main striking force of Halsey, that's what they wanted to do. And so I'm trying to find the quote here that I wanted. That we had always thought about how to cope with such a situation, an occasion as this. Where suddenly, miraculously, instead of transports, they've got these carriers to go after, and so they imagine then that these are American fleet carriers, and they delude themselves into thinking that they are going after fleet carriers. Koyanagi makes the comment too that the destroyers that we saw were multi-funneled with high freeboard, and their appearance and torpedo firing methods convinced us that they were cruisers. So they think that they've stumbled across one of the Americans' fleet carrier task forces, and they're going to go for it at this point. They thought it was a miracle, that this thing had materialized in front of them like that. And that's their mindset. From this point forward, they think they're battling American fleet carriers.
Yeah, even though the sightings couldn't be farther off from what they actually are. It's pretty amazing. Bill, the first Japanese salvos, let's get into that. Tell us about what the hell's going on here.
Well, this is Yamato's time to shine, kind of, right?
Right.
It's fired its guns before, but it's only fired its guns at aircraft. We talked about that in one of our last episodes. So here, those giant 18-inch guns open fire at roughly 30,000 yards. That's 15 miles range, folks. Firing a main battery for the first time at enemy ships. Those 18-inch guns trained forward to an elevation of 23 degrees. Yamato's forward second battery actually opens fire first, targeting the closest American CVEs. Seconds later, the other 18-inch guns spoke, I think this is the forward turret, 20 seconds after firing with a massive 3,200-pound shells, 6 of them, now that's 2 turrets, crashing into the sea just behind USS White Plains. Less than 40 seconds later, second salvo bracketed White Plains. This is not a good sign, folks,
No.
with a close aboard straddle. Nagato then opened fire with her 16-inch main battery. This is nothing to sneeze at. This is like bigger than World War I battleship standards, and this is the second tier of battleships on the Japanese side involved in this fight, Seth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say about Yamato's battery, for those who are not familiar with her, okay, on her forward deck, she's got 2 superimposed triple 18.1-inch turrets, but then right behind those 2 turrets, even higher superimposed, is a triple 155 millimeter, which is a 6-inch turret, which is
Light cruiser, yeah.
it's a light cruiser armament. It's a 60 caliber gun, so it's got a good long range. It's actually her 6-inch guns that open up on these ships first, followed by the 18-inchers.
And straddles at 30,000 yards is good shooting.
This is good shooting. Yeah, initially, because they're not under air attack quite yet. The Japanese are using radar. Ugaki, and just to clarify who Ugaki is, we've talked about this cat a lot during these various battles. Ugaki was Yamamoto's chief of staff. By the time we fast forward to this particular action, he's no longer on Combined Fleet staff. He is now in command of Battleship Division 1, which is Yamato and Nagato. And Ugaki kept a very detailed diary throughout the war, and it's one of the primary sources that nerds like me go to all the time to try to get the Japanese perspective on this. But yeah, it's Ugaki at this point who is in charge of Yamato's gunnery action that we see unfolding.
I know that she has radar, but does she have radar directors for these 18-inch guns?
Well, she's using her Type 22 radars for ranging information, and then that's getting fed into her fire control system as another one of the inputs here. So yeah, they're absolutely conducting the shoot visually, but they're using radar to give them a range input.
Range. Okay, yep. Thanks.
So these straddles, they're not direct hits, but these straddles absolutely rattled the eye teeth out of these CVEs. Rivets pop loose, water starts leaking through the seams, lights go out, radar screens flicker out. They're not hit directly, but these close aboards by, freight trains are enough to do some damage. One of the large shells from Yamato actually explodes under the USS White Plains keel. And according to her captain, quote, felt as though it lifted the ship from the water and twisted it, unquote. And I believe
probably did.
Probably did. The underwater explosion warped interior decks, cut steering control leads, and sprung oil and avgas leaks throughout the ship. So just as good, really, as a hit. It just didn't put a hole in it.
Yeah.
So Sprague's slow CVEs, and I do mean slow, I mean 18 knots downhill with a wind, are trying to get away. He realizes that if he has any chance at all, he has to, at the very least, now again, remember, aircraft are in the air, but he's got to further distract Kurita. Absolutely. By doing that, he's only got one thing two technically he can do that with, which are his destroyers and his destroyer escorts. They're going to be that distraction. At 0716, Sprague issues orders for his screening ships to deliver a counterattack on the charging Japanese to cover the CVEs as they begin to crawl out from under the rain squall that had offered them momentary protection. Leading the Japanese charge were the heavy cruisers that Ziggy Sprague was so rightfully concerned about. Turning southeast, the cruisers led by Kamano opened their throttles to flank speed, pushing 35 knots. And remember, these CVEs are doing 18 at best. At best. Crew Div 7 CO Vice Admiral Shiraishi Kazutaka issued orders that said, quote, "We are closing the enemy, intend to engage starboard," unquote. The cruiser column, again led by Kamano, then Suzuya, Tone, and Chikuma in one column, was passing ahead of the 2-ship column of Chokai and Oguro. closing in on the fleeing Taffy 3 rapidly, and I do mean rapidly because they're going twice the friggin' speed. The cruisers were now the primary problem. John, these are absolutely the primary problem for these cruisers in Ziggy Sprague.
Yeah, and you just outlined why too. They're extremely speedy vessels. The Japanese have always had a maritime shipbuilding tendency towards speed and firepower at the expense of range and protection. And so these cruisers are absolutely the manifestation of that. 35 knots top speed and armed to the teeth. They've either got 8 or 10 8-inch guns on them. They all have long lance torpedoes and typically 16 or so a piece with reloads. So, yeah, I mean, if these guys get anywhere near you, you've got a big problem. We still, at this point in the war, do not understand the performance characteristics of the long lance torpedo, and these things can really reach out and touch you. So, yeah, if these cruisers get on top of the CVEs, they're just going to absolutely tear them apart.
Yeah. Bill, tell us about a gentleman who takes command of a ship in 1943. Who am I talking about here?
That would be one Commander Ernest Evans. He is a legend in naval folklore, and for good reason. He is a true hero. Assumed command of USS Johnston, DD 557 in 1943, after fitting out in Seattle, probably Puget Sound to be more precise. Upon the ship's commissioning, he addressed his assembled crew with the words, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to go along had better get off right now." Now, those words, "I intend to go in harm's way," of course, are famous words of John Paul Jones, and coincidentally or not, they were the motto of my submarine, USS Indianapolis, SSN 697.
Do you actually have the option to just get off if you don't want to go in harm's way? That doesn't strike me as a realistic option, absolutely. Actually, but
You know what?
sorry,
I'm
no.
out of here. See ya.
Yeah. I
go.
did jokingly tell my crew as we were submerged, anybody who doesn't want to be here, you can get off right now. Nobody did. Go figure. This is not quite that bad for Ernest Evans.
Yeah.
So at 0716 on October 25th, 1944, Ernest Evans was just about to prove how deadly serious he was when he said that, Bill. One of the more legendary figures in naval history. Ernest Evans was every bit the hero and character he has been portrayed as. Born in 1908 in Pawnee, Oklahoma, Evans, who was of Cherokee and Creek ancestry, entered the academy in 1927, graduating in 1931. After graduation from the Naval Academy in 31, he's assigned to the Naval Air Station San Diego for a year, and thereafter until August 7th, 1933, served consecutively in USS Colorado, USS Roper, and USS Rathburn. After service at Naval Air Station Pensacola, this guy's all over the map.
Seriously.
He joins USS Pensacola, ironically enough, and 6 months later becomes aviation gunnery observer for that cruiser's Scouting Squadron 9. He served in that capacity until 1937. He was assigned to USS Alden, and this is important, DD 211, and assumed command of that vessel in March 1942. Prior to assuming command of Alden, he had served aboard that very same ship during the Battle of Java Sea, in which Alden and other Allied ships retreated in the face of the Japanese. After taking command of Johnston in 43, he worked the ship into a fine fighting machine that would more than prove her worth in the coming fight, and made sure that he would not retreat in the face of the Japanese ever again. Bill, as Evans stands on the bridge of Johnston and surveys the scene, what does he see? What is going on right now?
Yeah, sadly, he sees the outline of Japanese cruisers barreling down towards Taffy 3, which is not a good sign. I mean, the battleships would have hung back further, but those cruisers are going to look really ominous at this point. Even before Ziggy Sprague issues orders for the destroyers and the destroyer escorts to attack, Evans decides to do something on his own, take the initiative. We said this before. It was, the old saying, you can do no wrong by closing with the enemy and engaging. And that's what he does. So just below the bridge on one of the 40 millimeter gun mounts, these the Bofors, I guess they are. 18-year-old Bill Mercer watches as his destroyer drove away from the onrushing Japanese. It was then that he heard Evans' booming voice yell, "Left full rudder," as Mercer's Johnston heels over, oh no, to make a turn toward the Japanese at high speed. As Johnston's bow swung towards the cruisers, Mercer strapped on his life jacket because he can already start to see how this day's going to turn out, guys.
You know, and I'm laughing here, but I mean, talk about grim humor. I mean, yeah, what else? There's nothing you really can do except strap on your life jacket because the odds are I'm going to be in it in the water in the not too distant future if I live.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Now you don your your life jacket as soon as general quarters is sounded, battle stations. But you know, when you're at battle stations for hours, sometimes you stand down a little bit, you relax it. Something told this guy if he did, he needed to put it back on.
Yeah. And that is precisely what happens here. So Evans orders smoke and told OOD, officer of the deck, Ed DeGardy, to zigzag as the smoke poured out from the smoke generator so as to lay a pattern for which the CVEs could hide. As Johnston came about, Johnston's gunnery officer, a guy named Bob Hagen, heard Evans's voice come over the ship's PA, quote, "All hands to general quarters, prepare to attack major portion of the Japanese fleet. All engines ahead flank. Commence making smoke and stand by for a torpedo attack," unquote. Again, pucker moment here for all aboard USS Johnston. So as Johnston turns and heads towards the enemy fleet, the Japanese immediately recognize the threat and start directing their fire towards her. Large caliber shells from the battleships as well as 8-inch shell fire from the cruisers start dropping all around Johnston as she charges. Hagen looks towards his captain. I mean, this guy had just balls of solid rock, man. Balls of solid rock. Looked towards his captain and saw Evans standing on the bridge, cool as a cucumber, hands on his hips, bellowing out orders as the Japanese shells flew towards his little destroyer. Absolutely, utterly fearless. Utterly fearless. Hagen's the gunnery officer, so he knows all about the range of these 5-inch guns. He's keenly aware that they got to get close to start shooting and doing any kind of damage at all with these 5-inch guns on this Fletcher-class destroyer. Inside those turrets, every man aboard that ship knew exactly what was going on. They knew where they were going. They knew what was going down. All those guys in those turrets could do was sit there and wait. Out of range, all the gunners could do was listen for Hagen's voice to issue the orders and hang on. At 0710, that waiting ends. Evans orders Hagen to direct his fire on the leading Japanese cruiser, which is Kumano, at 18,000 yards, which is the maximum range of these 5-inch guns.
I was going to say, you can't reach out any further with a 5-inch 38. No. That's a long way away. So,
but you know, that's incredible because everything you see can outrange you. Yes. Everything, the cruisers, obviously the battleships, but you've got to get inside. This is like the boxing match where the dude with the short arms has to get outside, and you hope and he's got weak arms too in this case.
Yeah. 30 seconds later, the computer had the firing solution, and Hagen closes the firing key. Less than 2 seconds later, Johnston's 5-inchers bark, her shells flying towards Kumano, which, as Hagen watched through the binoculars, returned fire. An 8-inch shell burst just off Johnston's bow through red-dyed water. And this is a common practice. You know, the Japanese use dye in their shells.
Yeah. For different ships, so you knew which of those bursts were yours.
Correct.
Exactly. And this is what's happening here. The red dye splashes all over the bridge of Johnston, covering Hagen in red dye. And he says, quote, "I think they're mad at us," unquote. So Bill,
right.
Yeah, indeed. So Bill, tell us about Johnston and what's going on here from now on.
Well, she's not a machine gun cruiser, so there's a limit to what she can do, but she kept her rapid fire that by now is beginning to find its mark. Hagen watched as the shells began hitting and exploding on Kumano's length. When he saw hits, he tightened the pattern to 100 yards. That's the accuracy error, the circular error of accuracy, and poured the fire into the Japanese cruiser. Through his binoculars, Hagen could see his shells hitting exposed gun positions and tearing chunks from Kumano's superstructure. That's almost the most you can hope for against an armored ship. Miraculously, Johnston, although she had been weaving through a forest of shell splashes, had yet to be hit because Evans had been chasing the shell splashes. And so far, it had worked. As Johnston closed to within 10,000 yards of Kumano, Evans unleashed his torpedoes, all 10 of them. He had two mounts of 5 torpedoes each. At 0727, at least one of Johnston's fish hit Kumano. Now, a lot of torpedoes are going to be fired by the Americans today. Not many of them are going to hit, unfortunately, but this is one that does. The cruiser took the hit in her bow, and the resulting explosion tore the bow off. How many American cruisers got their bows torn off by torpedoes in the early parts of this war? Now it happens to one of the Japanese cruisers, slowing the ship to 12 knots, forcing her to slew out of line. Japanese Admiral Shirashi ordered Suzuya to come alongside and take he and his staff off. In the middle of the fight, the Japanese cruiser force had been reduced by 2 for the time being. Anyway, John, you had something to say about this.
Yeah, and 2 things I would impart here. If you look at the Japanese records in their track records of movement, they do not, in many cases, support the American visual claims of, oh, I hit this cruiser and I could see big chunks of the superstructure flying out and blah, 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 blah. There's overclaiming that's going to go on both sides here. And so you have to take these American eyewitness accounts with a large grain of salt when it comes to what they think that they do to the enemy. On the flip, this torpedo hit is absolutely documented, and it does exactly what they think it does. It tears Kumano's bow off. And yes, she's now effectively out of the fight. And she's going to have a pretty miserable coming month. She ends up limping back through Sibuyan Sea, makes it back to Manila. They slap a placeholder bow on her such that she can now continue to limp home. And during this time, she comes under air attack and yada, yada, yada. She's eventually going to be sunk off the west coast of Luzon. And Halsey famously said, if there's one Japanese ship I could almost feel sorry for, it was Kumano, because of her ordeal that is going to ultimately end up in her demise. So she's out at this point.
And it's kind of odd too. We didn't address this yet, but we should. Shirashi orders Suzuya to come and take his staff in the middle of the fight.
That's crazy.
You lose one cruiser, which is yours, obviously, without the bow. Now you just took a second one out,
right,
to do that.
Yeah, I mean the intermediary solution to that is you call a tin can over.
Sure.
And I'll move my flag temporarily to a tin can that's got the speed to overhaul a cruiser if need be. But yeah, I don't want to be taking a second of my heavy units out, because now, the net result is I came in with 6 heavy cruisers. I'm now down a third of that force, just because I have to transfer my flag.
Yeah, which takes time. It's not like he's going to jump in, and it's not a 5-minute ordeal here either.
No.
So as soon as Johnston's torpedoes are away, Evans orders Johnston to come about and just book it, just get out of there. As she did so, however, at 0730, the little destroyer absolutely walked into 3 18.1-inch shells from a Yamato. At least one of the shells penetrated through and through and did not explode, although the damage they did was severe. Johnston's aft machinery room was destroyed, reducing her speed from 25 to 17 knots. The massive shells blew through the ship and erupted a boiler in the after fire room. Superheated steam scalded everybody in there to death. All of her 5-inch guns were knocked out temporarily, yet as she passed through a rain squall, they gave her about a 10-minute breath of air. Some of those guns, 3 of them to be exact, come back online. Hagen wrote or said in an interview one time that getting hit by those 18-inch shells was like a puppy getting hit by a truck.
I remember that exact quote. Yeah. And again, you think about it. 3,200-pound shell coming down at 2,000 feet per second. I mean, that is a hell of a lot of kinetic energy.
Big time.
Two comments. The interesting point is that, of course, there's not enough armor on a destroyer to cause that shell to detonate. Hence, it penetrates, right, goes right through it. And the second thing is, spoiler alert, when they found the ship, right, Petrol found the ship, you could see this hole in the underwater footage, can't you?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. It's a big one too. It is a big one. It's 18.1 inches round. But
yeah, the funniest thing.
So seconds after Yamato's main battery finds its mark, her secondary battery scores on Johnston as well. At least it's assumed it's her secondary battery. Shells hit the destroyer on her forward funnel and port side of her bridge. Bob Hagen, the gunnery officer, who had been knocked down by the shell, stood up and looked outside his gun director and sees Ernest Evans, now bare-chested, with singed hair, his face blackened and bleeding. His left hand was pouring blood and he was missing 2 fingers. He staggers to his feet and begins bellowing orders again, refusing medical attention from the ship's doctor, saying, "Don't bother me now."
If not now, when?
Really.
Yeah. No, so a couple of points. Now, did the blast his shirt
Tore his
off?
clothes off. Yeah.
More likely, it gets seared and scorched by the flash burns.
Right.
And then you want to rip it off because it's so hot. But, it's one of those things happen. It's just amazing that he's still standing there fingerless and barking out orders.
And has the mental wherewithal to start barking out orders. That's even more impressive to me, is that not only can he physically stand there, which is a feat in and of itself, he can process things and get orders out and act like he's supposed to act, which is unbelievable. Bill, Johnston is not the only one that makes an attack here, though, are they?
No. You've got the, other ships alongside there, the USS Hoel, spelled like Noel with an H, right? So we'll pronounce it Hoel and Heerman. They came about and selected targets at 0737. Hoel selected the solitary Congo as her target. Congo had gone off on her own from the rest of the battleships and was roughly where Kumano had been before she was hit. So, John, what the heck is this guy? Is this like a melee, like in a Civil War skirmish where everybody is running off on their own? What's going on? Ship break formation.
You've essentially summed it up. And actually, I went back into her troms and was trying to. There's no mention of that in her troms at all. And actually, if you look at the Japanese accounts, they too are pretty silent on this particular matter. But when Kurita, sights the enemy force, one of the first things he does is orders general attack, which is essentially saying charge. Everybody go for it on their own. And the result is that the Japanese formation is not a formation. It is just a group of warships that are independently closing whatever targets they feel are appropriate. One of the things that Ugaki on Yamato complains about numerous times in his diary is that because it was such a surprise for them to come across our force, he says that we were very late in reacting and very slow to react. And so each unit seemed very slow in starting actions due to uncertainty about enemy conditions. Later on, he says, the fleet's attacking directions were also conflicting, and I feared the spirit of all-out attack at short range was lacking. Later on, he inveighs against the 7th Heavy Cruiser Division's start was extremely slow. So part of this is driven by the fact that Ugaki's a jerk. Seth and I were kind of talking about this beforehand, that this is a guy who never lets an opportunity to poke somebody else in the eye pass him by. But you do get a sense from the Japanese side that we don't have a coherent plan of what we're going to do here. It really is just everybody doing their own thing. And as a result, apparently Congo is slightly out of the main formation, is kind of off doing her own thing here, leaving her exposed to attack by these 2 other destroyers.
Yeah, Ugaki throughout his diary, like you said, he never misses an opportunity to point the finger at somebody else, and yet never accepts blame for anything that goes wrong on his end. So yeah, he's a bit of a wiener, bit of a wiener. So so Hoel, USS Hoel, launched torpedoes that Congo apparently evades. Um, but as Hoel approaches closer, both Congo and Haguro absolutely pound the destroyer with shell fire. Hull loses one of her engines, three of her guns, her fire control director, and her bridge steering and her radar all go out. Boom. I mean, this thing, again, when you're taking a Fletcher class destroyer, any destroyer, and you're attacking a battleship and a heavy cruiser, to where those battleships and heavy cruisers, unlike the Barroom Brawl Friday the 13th, can get their main batteries
In
to hit
action.
you, bad things are going to happen to your ship, and that's exactly what happens here. At 0742, Sprague issues an order for another torpedo attack. Upon receiving these orders, Hull again charges in, closing to within 6,000 yards, and fires what remained of her five torpedoes at 0750. So I mean, you can see this happens quickly. This is an 8-minute process here. It appeared that the torpedoes hit the target, which was Haguro, as Americans claimed they saw geysers of water, but those apparently were shell splashes, or as we said last week, bombs, because the Japanese were under consistent air attack, and this is exactly one of those times. So no, her torpedoes do not hit Haguro, but it is more than likely shell splashes or bombs, more than likely bombs. They're being dropped by Taffy 2's aircraft at this time.
Yeah.
So,
under normal circumstances, you would castigate an admiral like Sprague, ordering another torpedo attack. That's easy for you to say. You're not the guys that got to drive in within 7,000 yards to deliver this thing. But on the other hand, Ziggy is under shell fire himself. I mean, it's not like he's immune from any of this.
Right.
He's ordering the escorts to do what escorts are supposed to do. So
yeah.
Yeah,
Bill,
we're talking about
go ahead.
the mighty aircraft here, which is accurate. And as John said last week, the advantage, that I'm going to put that word in quotes, of our air assault this time is the aircraft are divided among many aircraft carriers, the CVEs, rather than just 4, and so that means that it's easier. It might be, these CVEs may be more vulnerable, but if you take one out, it's taking out by far smaller percentage of your deck space for aircraft. And so that means that you're able to keep up this rate of air sortie generation, which is really going to turn the tide of this battle.
And
it
happens all day.
But they aren't running
all
away.
Day.
Good, Seth.
No, I was going to say it happens all day. What you were describing goes on all friggin' day.
But the thing you got to keep in mind is these CVEs are slow, and they're inside gunfire range, and they're being shot at. So Ziggy Sprague says, do some of that destroyer stuff.
Exactly.
Put some space between me and the ships that are shooting at my aircraft carriers. I got.
Yeah.
The thing that's really going to turn the tide of this battle, as much as we hate to say that, it's the truth.
Well, it is the truth. It is the truth. So, crippled due to the shell fire that she receives and reduced to 17 knots, USS Hoel is in serious trouble. Her captain, Captain Klintberger, crew, they got their steering restored, and the ship began to draw away, albeit slower than she had been before, firing at the Japanese ships as she withdrew. Hoel had battleships on her starboard quarter and cruisers on her port. She was fairly well surrounded, and she was out of options. Surrounded and slowing down. Oh, you're not kidding. Hoel was easier to hit, obviously, as she's slowing down. Shells are tearing into her, flooding her compartments. She begins to list the port quickly, and Klintberger ordered abandoned ship, even as her forward turrets continued to fire. With her stern awash, messengers had to go into the forward turrets, because comms are pretty much gone, and tell the gunners to get out of the damn turrets, because they were still rocking and rolling. At 0855, Hoel rolls to port and goes down stern first. Only 86 of her crew survives. 253 men went down with the ship or died awaiting rescue. Of his men, Klintberger later said, quote, fully cognizant of the inevitable result of engaging such vastly superior forces, these men performed their assigned duties coolly and efficiently until their ship was shot from under them, unquote. You know, again, we said last week, and we're going to say it again. Yeah,
Bravery dial at 11.
At 11 every time. And it's not just Johnston. Everybody focuses on Johnston and later Sammy B, and we'll talk about her too. But it was all of them.
All
It
of them.
really was. It was all of them.
Yeah.
Bill, tell us about Heerman.
Yeah, before we get to Sammy B, we got the Heerman, who raced through the slow CVE formation to form up with the Hoel and the small destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts, Sammy B, for the torpedo attack. Heerman closed in astern of Hoel, and at 0754, she fired her torpedoes at Haguro from roughly 9,000 yards. But these two missed the mark. Pulling away, Heerman spotted the battleships Yamato, Nagato, and Haruna off her port bow. That could not have been a pleasant sight. Closing to within 4,400 yards, she fired her remaining 5 torpedoes, but again missed, guys.
I'm struck by the fact too that you don't hear practically anything about Japanese torpedo fire throughout this engagement. And I haven't gone back and dug through the records, and you really should add a Tony Tully on here, and a slacker like me. But yeah, the Long Lance plays practically zero role in this entire engagement. I'm not sure why that is, to be honest with you.
I don't know, because I mean, what was the range on those things? I mean, it was exorbitant.
Lord above, yeah. It depends on the speed setting, but at a high speed setting, and this is just off the top of my head, I think it's around 26,000 yards at 52 knots.
Remember, down in the Solomons, one got a hit at something like 18,000 yards.
Yeah.
23. Some egregious range.
Yeah, I think that was against the Blue, wasn't it?
Yeah, ludicrous range.
Yeah,
either way, yeah, long day.
They were designed to have the range of a battleship gun because they were designed to be able to reach out and touch enemy battleships at that range. But yeah, there's all of the destruction that's being meted out to the American surface escorts here is happening because of gunfire. We don't hear any reports of torpedo hits against any of these escorts, because we sure would have known about it if they'd gotten it.
And even if they're not going to shoot their long lances at the destroyers and the destroyer escorts, which one would assume that they're not going to.
Yeah.
You're within range of those CVEs.
Absolutely.
And you still don't fire.
And they ain't moving. Yeah.
No.
I mean, to an extent, torpedo fire in World War II really is an exercise in fire and forget, just saturate the target area. If I send enough fish swimming down that general vector, and I'm going to hit something. So, but they didn't.
Yeah.
Don't know.
So anyway. Heerman now engages Haruna in a gun duel, which is not a healthy thing to do. Yeah. For 8 minutes, the little destroyer trades fire with the 14-inch gun battleship, zigging and zagging, chasing shell splashes, which is a proven thing. Heerman was amazingly not hit yet. Her time would come later when she engages the cruisers that we were just talking about, trying to defend her CVEs. She's pummeled by gunfire. Yet, she would be the only destroyer from the screen to survive the fight, would be the USS Heerman. So, another one of the legendary ships in this event is, of course, destroyer escort USS Samuel B. Roberts. She is not just her, but the destroyer escorts are the smallest ships in the American counterattack, none of which, by the way, were ordered to take part in this counterattack, yet all of them, on their own volition, decided to take part in this counterattack. And John, these are not fast ships.
No, they're not. These are not just small destroyers. I mean, some people have that sort of mental image. These are purpose-built anti-submarine warfare vessels. That's what they're built for. We had realized during the Battle of the Atlantic that actually a destroyer in the Atlantic was a pretty crummy anti-submarine warfare platform. They're too big. They're fuel hogs. What you needed was a ship that was a little bit smaller, but a good sea boat in order to hunt down submarines. And so something in the 320 foot length range, 20 some knots, and armed with a couple 5-inch guns and a bunch of automatics, that's plenty to take on a submarine. And so that's what these ships are. And obviously, they are in no way fit to go up against any of the Japanese combatants that are in this fight, because their surface gunnery is nothing to write home about. But again, um, bravery dialed up to 11. They're like, well, we're part of the escort force too. We got to do our thing, and that's exactly what they do.
Indeed. USS Raymond,
Yeah.
USS Dennis, John C. Butler, and Samuel B. Roberts joined in on the attack. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, what I was going to add to that, John, is people think that modern iteration of the destroyer escort is a frigate. It's not. The important word in DE is escort. These ships were designed to escort. They're 100% ASW. Frigates are not frigates today in modern times are basically midget destroyers that do kind of the same thing, only not as well. And that's not what the DE did.
So Sammy B is under the command of a gentleman named Commander Robert Copeland. Against orders, Copeland decides that he should attack, much like Ernest Evans. Copeland told his crew, quote, "This will be a fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected. We will do what damage we can," unquote, doing her best speed under the smoke of the faster destroyers. So she's falling in behind the destroyers and
quickly getting left in their wake.
Big time, big time. Roberts stays hidden because she's hiding in the Japanese smoke, in the American smoke, as she's getting closer to it. Not wanting to give away his position, Copeland denies his gunners permission to fire, instead driving to within 4,000 yards of the cruiser Chokai. Firing all of her torpedoes, Roberts initially believed they had hit Chokai, but again, as we've seen before, in reality, they did not. Again, I don't know if they see, there's nothing that says they see splashes or anything. One assumes that they must, but again, the Japanese are under aerial assault at this very same time. So who knows?
But Seth, we got to go back to that speech, because that's got to be one of the most epic speeches of the entire war.
Oh, yeah.
Survival cannot be expected. I mean, I want to underscore that. Stomp my foot on that speech. Oh boy, that's going to motivate your crew. In any case, it works, and we're going to talk about how this resolves in a moment.
Yeah. At 0810, Commander Copeland realized there was no need for camouflage any longer, as his ship had been seen as she came out of the smoke following her torpedo attack. She opens fire with her 5-inch battery. She trades shots with both Chokai and Chikuma, supposedly hitting Chokai repeatedly in her superstructure with 5-inch shell fire. John, is there any confirmation of that?
You had to put me on the spot like that, didn't you, man? You had to. I can do real-time history
stuff.
Yeah, right. I don't remember.
Yeah,
I can admit that. I'm big enough to admit that,
Yeah. So while you're digging, Bill, tell us about what else is going on here with Copeland. What does he do with Roberts?
Well, he brings Robert in at high speed and pumps rounds into the two cruisers, trading shots between the two targets, which is not easy. Now he's got two guns, right? So he could put one on each, but it's going to be kind of like that. For the next 35 minutes, the little destroyer escort nearly shot every round she had, over 600 rounds of 5-inch shells in 35 minutes. As Copeland attempts to bring Sammy B out of the area, she came under fire from no less than 5 Japanese ships. So you've got the smallest ship in this battle being taken on by 5 Japanese ships, including Yamato and Nagato. So desperate to avoid the shells, Copeland orders his engines all back to cause the incoming rounds to miss. Now, guys, this is not a good tactic. I'm sorry. Backing away from shells, not a good tactic. However, the change in speed did actually make him an easier target. When you go all back, you don't stop immediately. It just slows you down, which is not a good way to get away from anything, whether it's submarines or shell fire, Seth.
Yeah.
No. The answer is no.
What was the question?
Whether or not Sammy B hits her, and it would appear that the answer is no, although she does later on take some shell hits, and this may be the same ones that they're observing. and it looks as if she was actually hit by 5-inch gunfire from the CVE White Plains. So there's an
Wow.
eye opener.
Yeah,
Anyway,
really.
How about
No
that?
kidding.
all right.
Well, I want to emphasize something you just said, Bill, about this gunfire duel. 35 minutes. 35 minutes. This destroyer escort is trading shots with 2 Japanese cruisers, and then later comes under fire from 2 Japanese battleships, including Yamato. 35 minutes. That is an eternity. That is an absolute eternity in naval warfare. At 0851, Roberts is hit by the first of several 8-inch shells, which caused damage to one of her boilers, slows her down to 17 knots. This is after Copeland puts on the brakes here. She begins to take a pounding from the cruisers when at 0900, Congo, at least it's assumed it's Congo, found her with a 14-inch salvo that killed her one remaining engine and caused her to flood rapidly. No surprise here. Her main steam line broken by the shell. Roberts was dying a horrible death with men scalding to death in the forward fire room. As Roberts begins to sink, Copeland gave the order to abandon ship. As he did so, out of the smoke ahead of him loomed the shattered USS Johnston, trailing after the second torpedo attack, a wreck still in the fight. God, this guy's badass. Bill, tell us about the death of Johnston here.
When the destroyer ran in for the torpedo attack, the retreating Johnston came about and joined the charge again. Out of torpedoes, Johnston could provide gunfire support as the others charged in. Johnston closed to within 6,000 yards of Tone and opened fire again. Johnston, her steering wreck, had to be controlled and steered from aft steering. This is emergency steering in the back. Evans grew tired yelling through the voice tube rudder orders to aft steering from the bridge that's basically useless anyway because it's been destroyed. So he goes stern to the fantail, opens a hatch, and he screams his helm orders through the hatch to the sailors controlling the rudder locally. You can't make this stuff up, guys. This is incredible. This is absolutely, if you told me, if you wrote this in a novel, I'd say, there's no way. These guys are making this stuff. This is not realistic, but it happened.
I mean,
total BAMF.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. It really is. It's absolutely incredible. Her radar is knocked out, obviously. Her guns were in local control, which means they could be fired individually by the guys inside those guns, inside the turrets. And they fired at what they could. Go ahead.
With lousier accuracy as a result. I mean, when you lose your director control, your accuracy just completely goes out the window. But that's what you got to do. It's what you got to do. So
with their own eyes, they had to spot the shells. Each individual turret had to spot the shells. From 7,000 yards at 0820, she begins to get in a gun duel with Haruna again. This is a second destroyer trading shots with this battleship. She claims she sees hits. God knows. I know. I'm assuming, John, you're looking it up right now. But regardless of this, trading shots with the battleship, Johnston was not hit at this time and retreated into her own smokescreen. 10 minutes later, she emerges from the smoke to see Gambier Bay, USS Gambier Bay, under intense shell fire from a cruiser, assumedly Chikuma. Seeing this, Evans told Bob Hagen, the Johnston's gunnery officer, quote, "Hagen, commence firing on that cruiser, draw her fire on us and away from that carrier," unquote. Again, just bravery of the utmost. We're already shot to hell. We look like Swiss cheese. I've been hit. I don't even have any friggin' clothes on, by the way. And I want you to draw fire onto us to save that carrier.
Don't have any freaking clothes on.
I mean, God Almighty, the bravery of this guy.
Not a lot of evidence here that she took shell hits from the surface ship. She does come under air attack as well during this exact same time. But anyway,
but that's important to note, though. Again, we've hit on this, and we're going to hit on it again. That the air attacks are going on as all this is going on. So the gunnery phase and this aerial assault is all happening at the same time.
One gigantic fur ball.
Yeah, and there might be a few minutes where one is not doing, at the same time, but regardless, most of this is happening at the same time. And you can imagine, again, you said you got to take the credit or the claims with a grain of salt, and you do, but there's a lot of stuff going on right now. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things going on.
And honestly, this is making a difference. The air attack would be very different if these surface engagements weren't drawing attention away from the guys on the bridges of those ships who are afraid those destroyers 5-inch shells are going to kill them.
Right.
That has a way of distracting you.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the length of the engagement, 35 minutes spent, shooting at other ships. That's 35 minutes when those Japanese ships weren't shooting at the escort carriers.
Right. Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. No, they're doing what they're supposed to do. They're drawing attention away from the CVEs. So now trading shots with no less than 4 different Japanese ships, including destroyers, who, by the way, are now making their first appearance into this fight, Japanese destroyers. Johnston became engulfed in enemy shell fire. She takes hit after hit, but continues to deliver her fire, albeit sporadically. From as close as 6,500 yards, Hagen fired and scored supposedly a dozen hits on the destroyer leader before it veered off, shifted fire to the next destroyer in line, and amazingly, the entire squadron turned west to avoid Johnston's fire, again, supposedly. Mixed in a jumble, and this is true, the Japanese ships began to pour fire into Johnston, who began to slowly die. Her gun mounts became knocked out one by one. Her hull was holed, and many times, and at 0940, her last engine was knocked out, leaving the gallant ship dead in the water. Perhaps vengeful, and this is in record, the Japanese concentrated fire on Johnston for a long time, leaving the CVEs alone for a brief respite. At 0945, Evans orders abandon ship. 25 minutes later, Johnston sinks with 186 of her crew with her. Evans was last seen on her stern and reportedly, and there's several different accounts, so nobody knows. Reportedly, he went into the water but was never seen again. So we don't know if he went down with the ship or if he got in the water. There's several guys that say he was in a boat and then was never seen again. Regardless of this, one of the bravest human beings to ever put on the United States naval uniform is awarded the Medal of Honor for these actions, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
Rightfully
Absolutely.
Yep.
So,
that's pretty much the end of the escort force at this point.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
It really is.
I mean, think about it though. I mean, so this is 3 hours now, a little more than 3 hours after the initial detection of this Japanese force. It's now 0945 when these ships go down. They joined the action around 0730 or so. So they've been in combat for more than 2 hours at this point. It's taken the Japanese that long to dispatch a force of 7 destroyers and destroyer escorts. That's a weighty contribution on their part, for sure.
Indeed. And to be clear, we're not diminishing their contribution at all. We're just trying to set the record straight that there was a lot of things going on at the same time. It wasn't the DEs and DDs that turned Kurita around. Bill, the gunfire isn't directed just at the American screening force, is it?
No, it's certainly not, because as we said before, the CVEs are within gunfire range. They're trying to go as fast as they can, but they can't go very fast to get away from these, this fleet line that's chasing them. The entire time, the Japanese were forced to fend off the attacks of the destroyers and the destroyer escorts. They continued their focus on the slow CVEs. As far as Kurita knew, the carriers he was attacking were fleet carriers. The fact that they couldn't get away very fast should have been a hint to him that they weren't fleet carriers, that they were slow carrier escorts. But for some reason, we'll never know, he doesn't get this right. It doesn't matter. He's going to go after them anyway, whether he thinks they're fleet carriers or not. As such, they were his primary focus, and the screening attacks were like incessant flies at a picnic. Initial gunfire on the CVEs from the Japanese battleships. They came from the Japanese battleships, and as the range to the targets closed, the Japanese cruisers lit into the slow carriers as well. The bombardment from Japanese surface ships lasted a little over 2 hours and was slightly effective at best. Japanese gunnery had been somewhat accurate, but as Taffy 3 went in and out of rain squalls, remember, with continuous American aircraft attacks against them the entire time, they hid behind their smoke screens. The shooting became wilder and wilder until the rain closed. Even when the CVEs were wide open targets, the Japanese ships were under constant aerial harassment. And so the Japanese gunfire was enough to do some damage, but was largely ineffective, Seth.
Yeah. So, John, we kind of touched on this briefly, but they have radar, but they're having to visually sight these targets, and they're having to visually shoot at these targets. They're not. This isn't Willis Lee's battle line here.
No. The Japanese never had the capability to do what we would call a blind shoot, relying on radar solely to do in these targets. It's always going to be some sort of a hybrid solution that'll have a radar component for ranging and then an optical component for deflection. And right. So yeah, you've got a number of hindrances then to Japanese gunnery. There are these rain squalls that they keep ducking into. There's a lot of smoke being laid frantically by the American ships to try to hide these carriers. And of course, because of these aerial attacks, I am slewing out of line in many cases. I'm doing evasive maneuvers. That throws my fire solution out the window. Once I settle down again on a new base course, okay, it's going to take me a few minutes to reacquire that solution, regenerate it, start shooting again. But yeah, their gunnery, the longer this action goes on, the worse their gunnery is getting.
Yeah. Initial salvos from the battleships shooting at the CVEs was from distances as far as 36,000 yards.
Which is absurd. Yeah, I forget what the longest recorded battleship hit was. For many years, they said it was Warspite against an Italian ship at Calabria, and I think it was like, I want to say 24,000 plus yards or something like that. Yeah, so 36,000 yards. That's like you're shooting from the moon. But
it's a Hail Mary.
Yeah, it really is. But Yamato's got the guns to do that kind of nonsense, and so why wouldn't you? I don't know. Anyway,
the cruisers are the ones that are really going to do some of the damage, some of the main damage here to the CVEs. They pour on the coal to gain ground on these almost said destroyer escorts, on these escort carriers. Their superior speed, despite the air and screening attacks, proved to be a bit of a game changer here in a minute. In their coordinated attack, the cruisers worked around the port beam of the CVEs to approach them from short range, as the CVEs could not maneuver fast enough to get out of the way. As Sprague brought Taffy 3 to the southwest, Kalinin Bay was in the rear of the formation. Now, you got to remember, these guys are swerving, they're moving all over the place. So carriers are going to trade places in the rear of the formation as the formation turns. At this particular time, Kalinin Bay is tail end Charlie. At 0750, she receives the first of her shell hits, probably from a battleship, it is assumed, that went clean through her hangar deck and out the other side. Over 13 other shell hits pounded Kalinin Bay, with at least 12 of them being 8-inch cruiser shots. What was key for Kalinin Bay, and the other CVEs for that matter, was the fact that they were, as we said last week, essentially unarmored. And as such, the AP shells went right through them and did not arm and explode internally, which, had they been shooting against an Essex class,
yeah, might have been a different story.
Completely different story.
There's a convincing argument here to be made that the Japanese, if they were going to take these CVEs under fire, should have been using HE rather than AP.
Yep. Agreed.
So,
yeah, agreed. So the shells that did cause damage, caused flooding, fires, and hold the hull in Kalinin Bay, and gave her a list to starboard. Ironically enough, and this is in her damage control, the list to starboard allowed the DC parties the chance to plug the holes on the port side that were left when the shells went through.
Wow.
American ingenuity, baby. That's all I can say.
American damage control again. Yay team.
Yeah. Bill, tell us about Fanshawe Bay.
Yeah, so Fanshawe Bay took 4 cruiser hits, all forward, that killed personnel and left light damage. White Plains took damage, albeit light damage, considering she was among the first targets of the fight. Interesting to note that White Plains fought back, not only with her aircraft, but also with her 5-inch guns. She fired 127 rounds of 5-inch ammunition during the battle. Gambier Bay, however, did not fare as well as her sisters. As the battle dragged on, she became the last sheep in the column. Now she's tail end, Charlie. At the rear of the formation, she was not covered by smoke, and the cruisers worked their way closer. She came under increasing shell fire, and at 0741, Gambier Bay fought back with her single 5-inch gun, and her captain chased salvos to escape for the time being. This went on for about 30 minutes until she took her first hit in the after portion of her flight deck. A fire started, which seemed to attract the wolves even more. At 0820, she received a punishing hit from one of the battleships that exploded underwater. Not the battleship exploded underwater. The hit exploded underwater. Her hull ruptured and flooded her forward engine room. So this is the beginning of the end for her, Seth.
Yeah. Yeah,
there's some I was just going to say there's some harrowing pictures, of course, from this action where you can, see these American CVEs trying to pour on the coal, and on the horizon you can see Japanese ships, shooting at them. It's it's pretty scary stuff.
There's a picture, and I think without looking at it right now, I believe there's a photograph. I think it's a White Plains. And it's taken from, I want to say Gambier Bay, or maybe it's the other way around. Regardless, they got aircraft on the deck they're trying to launch, and you could see shell splashes sprouting around this carrier as she's trying to conduct flight operations. It's a hairy day, let's just say.
It's a day at the office.
By the way, if you're that pilot, you're happy to be launched.
I bet you,
I'd like to stick around, but
really get me the hell off of this thing. So Gambier Bay's speed falls to 11 knots. Obviously, she's going to fall behind the rest of the formation. She's easy prey. Soon after the first major caliber shell hit that she receives another and starts listing to port. Over the next half hour, she receives at least 26 hits, ranging from 18.1 inch, 14 inch, and 8 inches. So she's just getting hammered. At 0845, she goes dead in the water. Abandoned ship is ordered. She capsizes at 0907. The only one, which is amazing, of the CVEs to be sunk by enemy gunfire. Keyword, enemy gunfire. All right, so after Gambier Bay capsizes, rolls over, and sinks, and she is the only CVE to do this, which is unbelievable. She's the only one to be sunk by gunfire. We have to, and we talked about it last week. We went into it for 45 minutes or so about Halsey's decision. We got to revisit it because he's still around. Bill Halsey is still around at this time. While the battle is raging, and I do mean raging, off of Samar, Admiral Kincaid sends a flurry of messages asking Halsey, and really anyone who's listening, where the hell is Task Force 34 and Admiral Lee? Bill, what's going on?
Yeah, so Seth, last week I said that there's something going on in Halsey's head. There's a behavioral issue here that I don't remember anybody really analyzing, doing this, and I'm not going to say it's psychological, it might be medical, because here we go. He gets the word through various means that a lot of his people are being killed. And what we're going to talk about here in a moment is that he rages, not because people are being killed, that may be his fault, but because he feels like he might have been insulted. There's something wrong with that, okay? And I can't pound my foot on that point too hard. Not worried about the people being killed, worried about the fact that maybe Admiral Nimitz insulted me. So here we go. While the battle rages off Samar, and Admiral Kincaid sends a flurry of messages asking where the hell was Task Force 34 and Admiral Lee. Remember, Halsey sent a message out, which we call a warning order, which says, I may assemble this Task Force 34 battleships and be aware that I may do that. And then he let it drop. He never said, what, do it? Assemble the battle force, Task Force 34? He never said when he was going to do it, what would trigger it. He just let it drop.
Didn't say anything.
Right. So Halsey didn't learn of the battle until 0822 that morning. Initially, Halsey said that he was not alarmed, thinking that Oldendorf and his dreadnoughts would be there to fend the Japanese off. As we know, that wasn't the case, and he didn't know the disposition of his forces. At any rate, according to his subordinates, when Halsey received the message, he looked suddenly very concerned, probably realizing he'd screwed up. He also realized that his and his aviators' conclusion as to the battle readiness of the center force was way off the mark. And I would say, I'm not going to put this at the feet of his aviators. I'm going to say that he was way off the mark. 8 minutes after the first message came, the next message from Kincaid came asking bluntly where the fast battleships were. Of course, they were with Halsey. Hell, he was on one of them, the New Jersey.
Yeah.
Halsey later claimed to be surprised by Kincaid's suggestion of Lee's battleships contesting San Bernardino. In response, Halsey orders McCain's task group 38.1, who was just coming back from Ulithi and were 400 miles away, to make their best speed into the area. Again, he doesn't know the disposition of his forces. This, my friends, is malfeasance of the highest order.
Yeah, he's got target fixation, is what it is, in my opinion. He's got target fixation on Ozawa's toothless carriers, and he's just not there right now. Literally and figuratively, he's not there right now. So this is key here. Most of Kincaid's messages were sent in the clear, which means that Nimitz and King were reading them. King, no surprise here, was apparently livid as the situation developed. And later, and this is
how can you tell?
Well, it's Admiral King.
How can you tell that he was livid?
How can you tell? Exactly, because Jocko Clark was in the room. Seriously. Jocko Clark is in the room. He's in DC at this time, and he's like watching King pace the inside of his office, and just, as Jocko Clark said, the language was very blue, which means, of course, probably every other word out of that man's mouth has got 4 letters in it. So apparently King later, after all this goes down, seriously considered relieving Admiral Halsey, like pulling him out and saying, that's it, your ass is done.
Should have happened.
We can talk about that later, yeah. Nimitz, too, was on pins and needles, apparently, throughout the entire ordeal, constantly buzzing his assistant chief of staff for updates on the battle. And to your point, John, which you put in the notes, he had never done that before, ever.
No.
Nimitz had.
Nimitz was not a control freak. Nimitz was capable of delegating and trusted his subordinates. And so the fact that he is, absolutely pacing up and down and wondering what the heck is going on, that's very unlike him. This is a guy who is able to keep his cool in pretty much any situation, and he is not cool right now.
He is not. And apparently he gets so hot and bothered, Nimitz does. He gets so hot and bothered that he actually leaves his headquarters and goes back to the house and starts pitching horseshoes, because he's like, I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. I got to do something to take my mind off of this show that's going down here. I need to just go. So he goes, because there's nothing he can really do. He can give orders, but he can't control it. So,
by the way, I've walked that walk from Makalapa headquarters to his house a bunch of times. It's only 50 feet. So this isn't a long walk. It's like he's abandoning his station.
Is he on Guam yet?
No, at this point he's in Pearl. No? He's in Pearl right now, at least I think. I'm pretty sure.
See, you put me on the spot earlier,
Now you put me on the spot.
Turnabout's fair play.
Consult.
So
consult
actually, let's
the
think about
Nimitz
that.
Trom, figure out where Nimitz was. Anyway,
regardless of this, whether he's 50 feet, 5 feet, or 25 feet, or 50 miles, he's so pissed off, he leaves his headquarters to go blow off some steam. Numerous subordinates, and I'm talking like 4 or 5, and the names are in the books, asked Nimitz whether or not he should directly inquire as to the location of Task Force 34, which, of course, is Willis Lee's fast battleships. Initially, what you were saying, John, he did not because he did not want to insert himself in the situation and wanted Halsey to handle his own issues.
Yeah.
Or as I put it in a note, trash. As the situation developed, however, Bill, that changes, doesn't it?
It does. By the way, he's still in Pearl Harbor. He
Okay.
didn't move to Guam until January 45. All
Thank
right.
you.
I feel vindicated. Yeah.
Real-time history.
Yeah. So he writes down this message. Okay. It's going to say from CINCPAC, action, Commander of Third Fleet, info, Commander Cominch, who's king, Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Fleet. CTF 74 or 77 is also an info addressee. And what he writes is, where is Task Force 34? That's the message.
Yep.
He hands it to his communications officer, and one of many, by the way. There were many communications officers. This was a guy who would have the watch right now, who trots it down to the message center, and they enter filler in the beginning and the end of the message. And the reason you do this is you don't want to give intel away by the enemy being able to read how long the message is, because the length of the message, you can read certain intelligence into it. So you mask the length of the message by adding fodder at the beginning of that, and it's usually meaningless fodder. So in this message, the beginning was turkey trots to water. Obviously garbage, right? Nonsense. At the end of the message, the filler was the world wonders. And the way you can tell the real message from the filler is there are two letters in code, right? So turkey trots to water, GG, golf, golf. That means after the golf, golf, this is the message.
Real
then
stuff
at the end
starts
of the
here.
message, pardon?
Real stuff
Separate.
starts here. Yeah.
The real stuff starts here, right? And at the end of the message, it's Romeo, Romeo. They wouldn't have used the phonetic alphabet. It would have been different phonetic, but it's RR. So the way the message reads is turkey trots to water, GG, from CINCPAC, Action Com, Third Fleet, Info Cominch, CTF 74, X. That means stop. Where is repeat, RPT? Where is Task Force 34, RR, the world wonders? And that's the message. So how's that received, Seth?
Not well. Not well, because somebody aboard USS New Jersey doesn't take out.
Neglects.
Yeah. And this is a screw up on that part. And that somebody's gonna, who was it? I don't know. It was
Right.
probably some, seaman first in the radio room didn't take that part of the message out. Regardless of that or not, the message that Halsey gets in his hands says, where is Task Force 34, the world wonders? And when he reads this, Halsey flies in. Yeah, he goes ballistic. Yep. Apparently,
not because his people are dying,
but because someone's calling him on the spot. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
He apparently, and there's multiple different renditions of what happens. Supposedly, he takes his cover off and slams it to the deck and stamps on it. And supposedly somebody else says he starts crying. I find that very hard to believe.
I read that though. Yeah.
I mean, there's multiple accounts of what happened. Bottom line is he loses his mind. Halsey loses his mind right here, starts screaming and hollering, and this is documented on the bridge of the USS New Jersey. His chief of staff, the guy we mentioned last week, Mick Carney, apparently gets Halsey by the shirt sleeve, grabs the fleet admiral. Well, I don't think he's a fleet admiral at this time. Regardless, grabs Halsey by the shirt sleeve, takes him by both arms and says, "What the hell are you doing? Get yourself together right now." And then Halsey, comes to and retreats into his cabin with Carney. And they're in there for an hour trying to get himself back together. Nobody knows what went on in there. Nobody knows what was said. But at some point, apparently, he being Halsey, realizes that there was a mistake made, and he starts to cool himself off a little bit. But it took the man over an hour in the middle of, he's in the middle of the Cape. Yeah.
Right. Which isn't helping Ziggy Sprague any.
It's not helping anybody.
Yeah.
Not helping
He
anybody.
should be solving the problem. Instead, he's crying and whining and, whatever he is doing.
Yeah. So he's in the middle of the Battle of Cape Engano, which we'll talk about next week, and the Battle of Samar is going on at the same damn time. So admittedly, he's got a lot of things going on, but he retreats to his cabin for an hour in the middle of all this circus to get himself back together because he loses his composure here. The message, the intent of the message was clear, however, even after you take out the world wonders, the padding. Nimitz realizes that something stinks, something ain't right, something is wrong. And the message was a slap across the face to Bill Halsey, basically saying, get your stuff together and what is going on here?
Yeah, fix it. First of all, tell me what the heck is going on, and second of all, fix it.
Fix it. Fix it like now. Yeah. So and herein we alluded to this last week, excuse me, and we mentioned it a little bit this week. Halsey's communications, if nothing else, were massively confusing to everyone, to literally everyone. And Kincaid, his subordinates, everybody. Nothing is clear here. And to what you said, John, last week, and again, you piled on too, Bill, his staff. This is a staff issue. Even if Bill Halsey says, here's my messages, that's what your staff is for, is to align this kind of stuff. And they fail Bill Halsey here. So according to what Nimitz saw, Halsey's lack of clarity, which is very abundantly clear if you read the messages to Kincaid, is what allowed the situation to exist as it was at that time. Nimitz was more irritated about that than anything. It's not that we couldn't handle the situation, is that Halsey's complete lack of discipline, lack of organization is what caused the problems that they're experiencing right now. The end result is that Task Force 34 is indeed formed. They reverse course and speed off, but they are never going to catch Kurita, even with the throttles on New Jersey wide open.
If I could inject here, Seth, real quick,
Absolutely.
we do learn from things like this. And in modern orders, guidelines, there's something that's always promulgated called commander's intent. And so before a battle like this, the commander would publish his overall intent. And basically, if you ever see anything that doesn't conform to my articulation of my intent here, you need to call it out, right? You need to call me out, call it out. There was no iteration, there's no time, the slightest vestige of commander's intent communicated by Halsey or anyone else at any point throughout this campaign, let alone battle. And so that's a real defect. We did try to fix this after this battle, and it's part of our doctrine today that you before you write any orders, you write commander's intent, and it largely derived from battles like this one that occurred during World War II.
So, regardless of all this mess, this battle's still going on, and it is still going on full bore. And as we've said the last 2 episodes, the air attacks are what is going to make Kurita go, is going to give him pause. There is some serious aerial activity going on here. The common idea. Go ahead, John. You're about to say something.
No. Yeah, we've already alluded to this, that the combat has been a furball. The Japanese find themselves in a hornet's nest, and they are under continual air attack during this time. Not huge formations of aircraft, a half dozen here, 4 here. Yeah, but it's going on all the time, and it's constantly breaking apart their formation. It's making their gunnery crappy, and it's making their overall speed of advance towards these carriers. Yes, they're getting closer to them slowly, but it takes an awful long time to get there. And in the end, when more torpedo-armed TBF Avengers show up on the scene, they're going to start doing actual more physical damage to these ships as well.
All right, so for those of you who are very observant, which is, of course, to say all of you, you probably realize that at least 2 of the 3 figures you see on screen have changed their clothes. And it's because what you don't know is I have a DeLorean and a flux capacitor parked outside this museum. No, in all honesty, we had technical issues yesterday. We have to wrap this up today. And Seth forgot his shirt in the dryer. So here we are. But that being said, back to the show. Back to the show. As you know, there's a common idea, there's a common myth, guys, that Taffy 3 was essentially helpless. And as we have just been hammering these last two episodes, is that they most certainly were not. Obviously, everybody knows about the destroyer and destroyer escort fight and all of its glory, all its rightful glory. But the air attacks on Kurita, as we have hammered throughout these last several hours, are what really forced Kurita to rethink his whole idea. And it all started as soon as Ziggy Sprague realized his plight, realized that he was in a bad way. He sends a message out basically asking anyone in the vicinity for any kind of help that they can send. The nearest force to him is Taffy 2 under the command of Rear Admiral Felix Stump, who was once the commanding officer of USS Lexington, CV-16. Stump responded to Sprague saying, quote, "Don't be alarmed, Ziggy. Remember, we are back of you. Don't get excited," unquote, which is rather rash, really, when you consider what Ziggy Sprague was being faced with at
Easy
that
for
time.
you to say, my man, but yeah.
Exactly.
They're
Exactly.
not being shot at.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, and Taffy 3's own aircraft do a lot of damage here, but in reality, it's Taffy 2's aircraft that do the most damage. And they do some serious damage here, John. They really do some significant damage to these Japanese cruisers here.
Yeah.
And their first strike from Taffy 2 consisted of Avengers armed with torpedoes and FM2s to strafe, as we've said before. And they launched no less than 5 strikes against Kurita all day long, which amounted to them dropping at least 49 torpedoes, which is a ridiculous amount, 59 tons of bombs, and 276 rockets. That is not a paltry sum of munitions that were dropped here. This is significant.
No, as we were saying, you know, that there is a lot of ordnance being expended on our part. And it's very much in the vein of, you know, just throw whatever you've got at these guys, you know, the kitchen sink, whatever will work. But the end result is going to be that there's a steady drumbeat of attacks and a steady toll of damage being taken on the side of the Japanese that are going to result mostly in the demise of a number of their heavy cruisers that they come into this fight with.
So, Bill, the first heavy cruiser to take some significant damage is Suzuya. Tell us what happens here.
Well, Seth, at 0735, she was attacked by 10 Avengers from Taffy 3. A near miss knocked out one of her shafts, reducing her speed to 20 knots. Attacked again by at least 30 aircraft, she was near missed again amidships. The near miss ignited a fire near her forward torpedo mount. The fire eventually turned really bad when her fish cooked off at 1100. This is one of many times this kind of thing happens during the war. Is that right, John?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, Suzuya's sister, of course, is the late and lamented Mikuma, which suffered this very same fate at the Battle of Midway. The bottom line is you've got, I believe they carried 24 long lance torpedoes on these cruisers. So you've got 16 that are in the mounts, and you've got 8 that are sitting in ready reload areas, all of which are above the main armored deck of this cruiser. So these are not protected. They did have Ducal steel lockers that they would keep the warheads in, which were basically good for splinter protection. This is a 1-inch, you know, steel locker, so this is nothing to write home about. And yeah, if you get a big fire going on the main deck anywhere near these things, eventually you're going to have to face up to the fact that each one of these fish has a 1,080-pound TNT warhead on it. And yeah, when they go off, it's a major kaboom. Not only that, of course, but you've got all this liquid oxygen, or compressed oxygen, I should say, in the torpedo itself, which is going to be a wonderful accelerant for any fire that's happening there. So net result is that, yeah, Suzuya's fish, a number of them cook off and do fatal damage to her. Bottom line is that she's going to end up sinking at about 1322. She lingers through the afternoon, but eventually goes down, and the destroyer Okanami takes off about 400 of her crew of about probably 950 or so, and that's all she wrote.
Yeah.
And remember, these torpedoes are one torpedo, one kill, but that's when they blow up underneath the ship. Somebody's going to ask that question. But you got, 16 here maybe cooking off, maybe all 24. Yeah, they're above the waterline, but this is going to be major conflagration.
Yeah, real bad.
So Chokai is another one of Kurita's cruisers that does not escape aerial attack. At 0850, she's hit by shell fire, probably from Johnston or Heerman, God knows, who knows. But she soon after she's attacked by Avengers from Kitkin Bay, apparently surprising the ship, which is kind of hard to believe. The Avengers received absolutely no AAA fire from Chokai as they were coming in, so several bombs wind up hitting her, according to reports. Her forward engine room is knocked out. John, what can you tell us about this incident
Well,
here?
this is a really mysterious one because there are no survivors from Chokai, not a single one. And actually, my esteemed co-author Tony Tully did a very lengthy article on the fate of both Chokai and Chikuma during this battle that came out in Warship International back in the year 2000. He thinks that actually the majority of the gunfire that hit Chokai in the early phases of the battle are from none other than Samuel B. Roberts,
Mm.
and that they are sufficient to cause her to be unnavigable by about 0900. So that's
Wow.
quite a thing when you think about it. You know, a destroyer escort apparently putting enough of a hurting on a heavy cruiser to at least have her go dead in the water for a little while. Um, it seems pretty clear from accounts of the Americans that were in the water after their ships were sunk. They saw a Japanese cruiser get back underway at low speed throughout the afternoon and eventually disappear over the horizon. And that would seem to be Chokai. She probably got one of her engines going again. She's being escorted out of the area by the destroyer Fujinami. And eventually, though, it appears that her engine's conked out late in the afternoon. Fujinami scuttles her at around 2140. So we're talking,
Day.
long day. Takes off what survivors she can, starts making her way out of the area, and she is going to be sunk with all hands the following day. And so all of her crew, along with the survivors from Chokai that she had picked up, all perish.
Hmm. Well,
Wow.
that's a lot of people going down
It's a
that
lot of
Davy Jones
people.
locker. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's incredible. Not to be outdone, Chikuma, Bill. She also falls victim to aircraft, doesn't she?
Yeah, but this time it's from Taffy too, Seth. Avengers from the Natoma Bay hit the cruiser at 0853 in a classic hammer and anvil attack that put at least one torpedo in her port quarter, knocking out her steering and destroying her rudder. She took two more fish from Kitkun Bay, which flooded her engine room. Again attacked by Avengers from Omni Bay. She was dead in the water and helpless when they bored in. So coming in on her port side at 14:15 in the afternoon, the Avengers threw three fish into her and watched her capsize within 10 minutes. This is, I hate to say it this way, but this is Indianapolis fast, isn't it,
Yeah,
John?
right. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And we actually have a couple of pictures from this attack, including one taken by one of the Avengers that has just gone over the top of Chikuma after having put a torpedo into her. And Chikuma is already visibly settling by the stern and listing to port. And yes, the Japanese accounts indicate that she capsizes and sinks by the stern within 15 minutes of that attack. Her fate too is equally grim in terms of survivors. A number of the guys are going to be fished out of the water by the destroyer Nowaki. Nowaki then tries making it out of the area. She actually gets hunted down the following day by a surface action group from the Americans and is sunk near the mouth of the Sibuyan Sea. And all of her crew and the survivors go down with her. There is one survivor from Chikuma who was not picked up by Nowaki. He somehow manages to drift and or swim to the island of Samar and gets out of the water. He's the only guy who lives from that cruiser.
Damn.
Yeah.
Do we have any idea? I know it's a long shot, but do we have any idea what happened to that dude after he got ashore?
No, I do not know. I don't know.
I would
I have to.
imagine he did not endure a good fate at the hands of the
Yeah, could well
Filipinos, if I
be.
was to guess. Yeah.
Mhm.
So But the fact that we even know that he survived says that he might have survived too. I
Yeah,
mean, who
maybe.
knows?
Yeah, it's quite
Anyway,
possible.
yeah.
So these aren't the only ships that are obviously damaged, but yet they're the ones that are take the most damage in these aerial attacks. Many of Kurita's ships are damaged in the attacks throughout the day, and even after Kurita breaks off his attack, which we're going to talk about in
Yes.
a minute. They were pursued by the aircraft from Taffy 1 and Taffy 2 mainly. So I put this in the notes to put it into perspective. The amount of aircraft thrown at Kurita by Taffy 2 and 3 throughout the day was actually greater than
Yes.
the amount of aircraft thrown at Kurita by Task Force 38 the previous day.
Again, which goes back to
Think
the
about
larger
that.
point that this is a pretty formidable force when you get right down to it. The individual components are not very battle resistant, but there's a lot of these components. And, Taffy 2 is launching attacks all day long. The other thing I point out here too is that Kurita came into this operation with 10 heavy cruisers. Okay. And in the course of the sinkings at Palawan, what happens in the Sibuyan Sea, where he loses another one damaged, he's going to come out of this battle with only 2 operational cruisers. There's another pair of cripples that are going to make it back to Singapore. But what this sort of points out is that we're getting into the phase of the war here where U.S. Navy isn't just beating the Japanese Navy anymore. We are annihilating it. And, just looking at the damage done to Kurita's cruiser force gives you a sense for, what's starting to go down at this point.
Yeah. So, guys, the way this is played out throughout the mythology that's developed over the decades is that this brave contingent of destroyers and destroyer escorts took on the huge Japanese formidable force,
Yeah,
and at
which
their
is
own
true.
sacrifice turned them away.
Which is
And
not true.
inexplicably, Kurita, after facing these destroyers, runs away.
Yeah.
Now, the part of that story that's not a myth is the bravery aspect of it.
Sure.
100%.
Yeah.
But that's not at all the way this went down, is it?
Right. Yeah, what ends up happening here, there's been a lot of speculation about Kurita because he does make the decision around 9 in the morning, 9:11, to call this thing off and to turn his force for home. And what the heck was he thinking about? And it's really kind of difficult to suss out what's going on. There are some erroneous reports coming in from some of the observers on the Japanese ships, the lookouts, if you will, that they're sighting masts to the north of Kurita. And they get it in their minds that that may be another American carrier task force. And they are frustrated because they can't seem to come to grips with the American carriers that are in front of them, even though they've sunk one and damaged another couple. What I find so interesting here is that when they first cited Taffy 3, they describe it as being this heaven sent opportunity. It's a miracle that suddenly we've got this target that we've wanted that we think are fleet carriers in our
For
sights.
years. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
But over the course of the coming 2 hours, 2.5 hours, the battle is not going the way they want it to go. And now I think there's a sense on Kurita's part that I've stuck my neck out way, way, way too far. And now there's this sort of illusory sense of we're surrounded by enemies. There are American carrier task groups all around us. What are we going to do here? We need to go home. Yeah,
He's already lost the Musashi,
yes,
and if he loses the Yamato too, end of story, right?
right.
Mm.
Yeah, so and we get conflicting accounts on this too. I mean, Ugaki says the enemy task force seemed to have prepared for our attack and the Leyte anchorage by taking a mobile disposition. As the enemy situation at Leyte was unknown, our attacks into Leyte would only make us an easy prey for the enemy. Instead, better turn about and attack an enemy task force, i.e., this illusory one that they think is to the north, when it least expected us to come. So yeah, they come about and they go off looking for this task force to the north, which isn't there, which isn't real. And the result is essentially the end of the battle. It's kind of nuts.
So I got a couple of, I don't know, I don't want to even say theories, but ideas.
Yeah.
We talked about when we talked about civilian C, we talked about Kurita himself, about the man himself, and he'd had a mixed bag of successes and failures, or not
Yep.
necessarily failures, but just things that didn't go his way earlier in the war, and he had shown a proclivity for taking care of his men, which is
Yeah.
an admirable trait. And he also and his junior officers had also expressed significant irritation, shall we say, at the fact that they were being, in their minds, sacrificed for something that was potentially out of reach, whether they encounter Taffy 3 or not. I think personally, after having done a lot of reading on this, like y'all have too, that I think Kurita realizes, like you were saying, that he is somewhat surrounded by enemy, at least in his mind. And again, the fact that he had been taking so many air attacks just this day alone, more than he had, twice as much as he had taken the day before,
Right.
in his mind, would confirm that very thing. It's like, good God, where the hell are all these damn airplanes coming from?
Yeah.
And he, whether he thinks or not that they're chasing Essex class, which obviously they aren't. It's got to be in the back of his mind that that's only what, 6 carriers? I know they've got more than that. These other cats got to be around here somewhere, and these damn airplanes got to be coming from them. So it's only a matter of time before Bill Halsey and all the boys show up on that horizon, and my goose is cooked. And I'm not going to sacrifice my men for something that I think is unattainable. Get the hell out of here while I can. That's what I think he's doing.
Yeah.
And he's exhausted. He hadn't slept in 3 days, by the way.
Yeah, and I think that is an important factor too. I mean, this guy's had a cruiser sunk out from underneath him. He's ended up in the drink. He's still getting over dengue fever. He has not slept well in the past 3 days. His chief of staff makes a really interesting comment too about just how demoralizing constant anti-aircraft attacks are. That there's just nothing less productive, I think he put it, than having to endure anti-aircraft attacks. And again, it's just, yeah, the death of 10,000 cuts kind of thing. The damage just keeps piling up, and yet we can't seem to get to grips with this force that's in front of us. I do find it baffling, though, that you do have a force in front of you, and yet you decide to drop the one that's in the hand and go for the one that is, you think, in the bush.
The Phantom.
So Kiyonagi, Kurita's chief of staff, writes after the war, I think, just a very lucid assessment of the whole thing. He says, looking back today, when all events have been made clear, we should have continued to Leyte Gulf. And even under the circumstances, and with our estimate of the enemy's situation at that time, we should have gone into the Gulf. Even with the possibility of enemy carrier forces near at hand, we should have chosen the single definite objective, stuck to it, and pushed on. Leyte Gulf lay close at hand and could not run away. And I think that's right on the money.
It doesn't move very fast.
Yeah. And I know there's got to be transports there. They may be empty transports, but at least it's an opportunity to do damage to this enemy. When I fast forward to April 7th, 1945, when Yamato was going to be sunk with horrific loss of life and accomplishing absolutely nothing, I think if you're Kurita, you have to understand that this is all of these ships are going to be sunk at some point in time in this war. If you have the opportunity here at hand, you are actually at grips with the enemy and have the opportunity to do damage to the enemy, you have to take it. I just think his decision is nonsensical ex post facto. Even if you end up getting your force annihilated, this is arguably the only opportunity you're going to have to do damage to the enemy.
Yeah, yeah.
We thought so little, I shouldn't say that. MacArthur committed to going back to the Philippines. We've argued in prior episodes about whether or not, in our King versus MacArthur episode, whether or not that was the right call from the standpoint of ending the war quickly. Maybe he thinks, my goodness, the Philippines just aren't worth it, which is kind of the opinion that I came, we all, I think, separately came to ex post facto. I mean, with 2020 hindsight,
Yeah.
the more direct route to Japan would have probably saved lives, shortened the war, and all that. And if he's thinking, it's kind of where you were going, Seth. If he's thinking that for sooner or later we're gonna have to duke it out over the homeland, do I want to survive that day, or is the Philippines really where we're going to lay it all down?
I personally think, just from having read the things that he had said, the attitude
Mhm.
of his JOs before any of this even goes down,
Mhm.
they had not bought into the plan.
Yeah.
Right.
And this is the first time that I know of, John, you would know better than I, but this is the first time that I know of during the entire Pacific War that an admiral and his junior officers in the Imperial Navy are going, you know what, this plan sucks.
Yeah.
And this ain't going to work. I mean, they're
Yeah.
not, and we even said that if anything, Kurita was a realist. He knew the situation was not good. And he
Yeah.
also knew that the decisive battle had long since sailed off into the sunset. And I
Yes.
really do think that he felt, he's like, God dang it, if I don't want to waste these guys' lives if I don't have to. And when he gets in that situation, and he gets in that tangled plate of spaghetti of
Furball.
fur ball,
Yeah.
that he's just like, you know what, the hell with this. Because
Yeah.
he's not making any gain. Yeah, to your point, exactly. He had sunk one carrier and he damaged obviously a lot of other ships and sunk the destroyers and Samuel B. Roberts and everything else. But that's also not sinking the New Jersey. That's
Yeah.
not putting holes in Enterprise.
Yeah.
That's and I just think he's like,
Yeah,
I'm out.
but the other part of me is that this is a Navy which is so ultra Mahanian in its
Yeah,
outlook. You have enemy warships under your guns right now. You know, just just by reflexive animal instinct for the
sure.
40 years of naval indoctrination that you've had crammed down your throats, how can you throw away that opportunity?
Yeah.
I haven't
No,
had a minute.
yeah.
I can see them. I can shoot at them.
You're
I don't know.
shooting at them. You're shooting
Yeah,
at them
you are
now.
shooting at them, right?
Yeah.
Just keep going. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah. I don't know.
Eh,
I don't know. And that whole, I had it somewhere around here. Mark Still's book on Late A Golf, which
Mm,
is the newest study out on Late A Golf.
mhm.
He hypothesizes that the whole sighting report of masts on the horizon was fabricated.
That could well be.
And that was an out. That
Yeah,
was an out for Kurita, because it was apparently, it came from Kurita, and Kurita's chief of staff supposedly is the ones that saw the masts on the horizon. So
right.
Honestly,
who
the height
knows?
of eye, the radar is higher than the lookouts, and you're going to see it on radar before you see the masts visually.
That's
And
And
so,
there's no record of that, by the way.
there's no record
fascinating.
of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm with him. I think it was fabricated post facto.
We'll never know.
Yeah.
Bottom line
Right.
is we'll never know.
The,
And
the other the other data
that,
point I'd throw out is that after the war, Kurita is a very unpopular man
yeah, I
within
saw
the
that.
surviving Japanese naval officer community. They just couldn't stand this guy, and a lot of them, frankly, just called him a coward. I mean, you're in the middle of a battle and you ran away from an enemy when they were right in front of you. What are you doing? So
Mhm.
Yeah.
yeah,
And again, counterfactuals are always dangerous, but if he does continue in the late A Gulf, we talked about, Halsey detaching 34, they're going to run into Task Force 34. Like,
yeah,
there's
they
no
are.
doubt they're going to run into him. And
And they're going to be annihilated. I mean, don't get me wrong.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
the decision, if Kurita makes the decision to keep going, his whole force
Hmm.
is going to be wiped out.
No doubt.
He will make it into Leyte Gulf. I mean, that's pretty clear. There's nothing really to stop him. But yeah, there's no going back after that. That's
Mm-mm.
for
But
sure.
his whole route in there is still within range of the aircraft on these CVEs,
Yeah.
right? So he's going to be pummeled all the way in.
Yeah.
Um,
But
he's going to get.
he can do more damage on the way in as well. I'm going to have
That's
to
true.
plow my way through these Taffys, but they only go 18 knots. I can do
Yeah, you're
that
going
if
to
I want.
outrun them before anything
Right.
else.
Eventually,
I,
what's going to happen on the American side is that the formation is going to fall apart. You're going to fall back on the last resort that a convoy would do under submarine attack, which is to scatter the convoy. Just everybody run, because now they can't hunt all of us down. Being concentrated in one formation is dangerous at a certain point, but regardless, yeah, Kurita's going to be wiped out if he keeps going. But at least he might have been able to do more damage to us.
It reminds me, the entire time we were talking before we had our technical issues yesterday and again today, I keep thinking of Louisiana in the middle of August. Why? Because of the freaking mosquitoes. And I'm being serious though. If you go outside in the afternoon or the late
You just get
evening,
waylaid.
you get hammered with these.
Yeah.
You feel like a pincushion inside of 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that going on in Kurita's mind. And it's constant. He's being harassed by hundreds of mosquitoes for 2 days.
Yeah.
All day. And again, you go outside in the summer in Louisiana, and after about 2 minutes, you're like, God, it's enough. And you go inside.
Right.
And it, so,
that's a good point.
Well,
really.
Yeah.
But Seth, in Florida, it's the no-see-ums, and they hurt worse.
Yeah.
So would those be the submarines?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
maybe. Yeah.
All right. Enough with the metaphors.
Anyway.
All right.
So yeah, so to wrap this epic battle up, the battle is clearly an American victory, if not, as I put in the notes, a Pyrrhic victory. And it's true. Kurita had turned away, been denied his victory mainly due to aerial attacks that we've been talking about for 2 days. The American losses were heavy, however. 2 CVEs are sunk. USS St. Lo was sunk later in the day by one of the first organized kamikaze attacks, and that's another talk for another day. 2 destroyers, and Gambier Bay obviously is also lost. 2 destroyers had been sunk. 1 destroyer escort had been sunk. 23 aircraft were lost. 4 CVEs had been damaged. 1 destroyer heavily damaged. Of course, that's Heerman. 2 destroyer escorts had been damaged to varying degrees, and 913 men had been wounded. Over 1,100 Americans are killed in this battle. However, the vast majority of the guys that are killed in this battle from the American side, obviously a lot of them go down with their ships, but the majority of them are actually lost in the water after their ships are sunk.
Right.
There's a whole debacle about the rescue situation here, because and again, that's another conversation we could have, but there's still a fight going on here. Even after Kurita pulls away, there's still combat operations going on. There's guys in the water. So, it's a Pyrrhic victory, but it is a victory. I mean, it's clear cut. We turned Kurita around here.
Right.
So the Japanese also suffer, John. I mean, we talked about the 3 cruisers. Do we have, I put in the notes, 2,700 men had been lost in various ways, but it's got to be higher than that.
I feel like it is higher than that, and I don't have a credible number, to be honest. It could well be, around 4,000. And it depends on, where do you slice the beginning and the end of this particular engagement, too. Do the survivors that are lost on Fujinami and Nowaki the following day, do those count as part of this action? I don't know. But the bottom line is, as we've already talked about, they take another trio of heavy cruisers off of the roster. The battleships, other than Musashi, make it out of there relatively unscathed, but this force is going to be harassed by air attacks all the way back through Sibuyan Sea, and beyond, until they actually make their way back to Brunei again to refuel.
I mean, guys, for all intents and purposes, the Battle of Leyte Gulf is over. Yet there is still another engagement that we do have to talk about. And of course, that's the Battle of Cape Engano. That's the carrier battle that Halsey. That's the cheese, as we've been saying. That's the cheese. But I mean, they were never a threat to Leyte Gulf, and I mean, we'll talk more about that next week, and we'll let Bill sink his teeth into Bill Halsey again, and which I know he's dying to do. But I don't know. Do you guys have anything else to add to this absolutely epic naval clash before we wrap it up finally?
No, I think I've said my piece.
Bill, the only thing I would say is this is, many people consider this the pinnacle in, or I don't know how to, an inflection point. There's several inflection points in the Pacific War. Leyte Gulf, the Battle off Samar, things like this. I mean, many, many, many books have been written about this. So it's got to be an inflection point too. And yet, despite all of that ink spilt, so many myths still exist that need to be skewered.
Yeah. Hopefully we did that today and the last 2 days, I guess it should be said. So anyway,
For those of my cohorts who can't, keep their wardrobe continuity going, from day to day
Exactly.
broadcasts.
There we
Yep.
go. Oh, well, such as it is.
Yep.
But I think the next time we get together, we might have to see if we can coordinate.
There you go. I like
All right.
that.
I like that idea.
All right. Well,
But Seth, I'm all for subtlety and good taste
Yes.
in sartorial. Is that a word?
Yes.
it is.
Okay. So we're going to have to make sure we're subtle
Yes.
and wearing
Yes.
something tasteful.
I
We'll
like
blend
you.
in. We'll blend in.
Okay.
Absolutely blend in. So
Very
with
good.
that, we want to thank you very much for listening in on our conversation. Please subscribe to the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast, wherever you receive your podcast. Give us a rating and review. We do appreciate it. If you want to see the video version of this and any of our other episodes, subscribe to our YouTube channel called the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. Got a question or comment, send us an email at unauthorizedpacificpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, my name is Seth Parrott, and I want to thank you very much for listening and or watching for the last couple of days on Samar. John, thank you as always, my friend, for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. Always a great time.
Absolutely. And Bill, bring us home.
See you again next week.